9 o'clock on the dot. And I see there's just still a few more people still joining. I do want to just maybe say we give it just an extra 5 minutes before we can officially start with the session. So wherever you are joining us from, just maybe take 5 minutes to prepare yourself, make yourself comfortable. Grab that cup of tea or coffee, a glass of water, so that 9:05 we can officially commence with today's program. My name is John Mufukeng, by the way. I'm from the Social Housing Regulatory Authority. So thank you very much for joining with us this morning. But yeah, let's give it 4 more minutes, and we will start promptly at 9:05. Karabelo, while we are waiting, just to confirm if you can hear me, I've given you the sharing rights, so I would want to believe that you have received those.
Hi, John. Yes, I can hear you clearly, and I am able to share. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Let me put on my video just so that great. Yeah. No, we are not on our side, John. Thanks.
It was a nice note to start on. You'll notice that I've muted now all the mics. I think it's just in the interest of securing the quality of this call. We'll keep the mics disabled. I will, however, enable them as we go along, because we do want to have a very interactive session this morning. Well, good morning, everyone. It's 9:05, and as promised, I do want us to start. Welcome, and thank you so much for making time to join with us on this part one of the important topics. In fact, this is part one of the topics that is part of the series of topics that we have training organized around. I mean, we have a topic on tenant and client services management. We have a topic on SHI accreditation, in other words, where we look at how does one package their application for them to be accredited as a social housing institution. Those who don't know what a social housing is, we'll be unpacking that today. We have a topic around project packaging, right? In terms of now that you are an accredited social housing institution or you are a private developer recognized by the SHRA, how do you package a development, a social housing development? So these are a series of topics that we have. But for today, we thought let's run a topic on introduction to social housing. In fact, this is where we should have started, because this is where the base and the foundation is. So for the next 2 days, our attempt really would be to unpack a number of things, starting with the legislative framework, just delving much more deeper and unpacking what are the policies, what are the legislations or pieces of legislations that are in place in terms of that informs social housing institution. Chief amongst many, I'm sure you will hear about the Social Housing Act, which is an act of parliament, which makes this program one of the key programs when it comes to the delivery of human settlements in this country. But there's a lot more in terms of the legislation or pieces of legislation that informs a program such as this one. We are not going to stop there. I mean, if one was to start and bake a cake, there are a number of ingredients that you need, right? Among others, we'll be looking at what are the institutional arrangements. And when we talk about institutional arrangement, we're talking about stakeholders, whether they coming from outside or internally, we need to affair ourselves with who are the key stakeholders that would make this thing work. And there will be unpacking quite a number of things as well. We will be moving on and also looking at the product itself, because social housing has that niche in terms of, the product it is intended to be. And again, some of that is spoken to in the the policy or the Social Housing Act itself. So we'll be looking at that product, and linked to that, we'll also be looking at the financial model. How do we make this thing work financially? What is required in terms of finances and what is available to make social housing work? So that would be the focus of the next 2 days, to really unpack this animal called social housing. Social housing. I'm not alone. I am joined by a few of my colleagues, but chief amongst others would be our lead facilitator, Mr. Karabelo Bowe, who will take over the session from this point on. We will, I think that in terms of the format and structure, really, we'll just run the presentation, and at various intervals, we'll open up for the Q&A and discussions as well. But if there is anything pressing, please use the chat line as well to register. Between myself and the other colleagues who are not in the forefront in the presentation, we'll be monitoring what's coming through the chat line and escalating those things as well. You have the other reaction functionalities as well. You cannot hear me. Can somebody confirm that they can hear me?
We hear you, John.
Oh,
Clearly.
I saw someone say they cannot hear me. So maybe just try and fiddle with your sound that side, say or maybe. So yeah, we will be observing and monitoring the chat as well. But you also have the number of reactions in terms of the this tool. So if there's anything, raise your hand, and we are more than willing to stop and take your questions or comment. Karabel, I think that is all in terms of what I needed to outline in terms of the opening. I guess then you'll just give us a structure in terms of the program and everything else that relates to today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and good morning to everybody, all the attendees. Let me just get my screen right. And while I get my screen right, if I can direct everyone to the chat. I think also, maybe, sorry, for introductory purposes, my name is Karabelo Bowe, and I'll be the lead facilitator. I'm also not by myself. I'm joined by other colleagues from NASHO. We are from an organization called NASHO, the National Association of Social Housing Organizations, and we work in the space as an NPO, just assisting and developing the sector with colleagues like the SHRA and others. And I'm assisted by two colleagues, or a colleague mostly, Mpo. And if I can just direct you to the chat, we've put a small, a quick 3-question survey in the chat group. If I can ask, or if I can direct you to that, just to kind of help with the registration, as well as just to kind of understand some of the expectations from today's session. I think John clearly covered, the intentions for the 2 days, but we want to try and be as sort of flexible and agile as possible and respond to, I guess, some of your needs that we might have missed, or that we might have underrated, and therefore we can just maybe bring it up in the chat. So please, if you look in the chat, just click on the link. It's about 4 questions, just so that we can get to know where colleagues are from, whether you an aspiring SHI, whether you're from a municipality, what you would like to get out of the session. And I think what we'll then do is we'll show that once I guess some of those results come through. Maybe just as well to check if I can get a thumbs up that I'm audible. Thank you, Ariane. Thanks, Paul. All right, great. Cool. So we've got 9, 10, 11, 12, about 3.5 hours together. Today, share this. Back. Okay, great. Um, so from an introductory perspective, just while we're getting those answers on where everybody's from, but really as per John, the objective of this training is just to create a broad understanding of the social housing program. We'll obviously touch on things like policies, on the product itself, the different why the program works and how does it work, the legislation that we operate in, but as well as some of the small nuances in operating a successful SHI. And I guess really the objective is to try, especially for entrepreneurs, to try and assist you in making an informed decision, at least the starting one on the role that you wish to play within the social housing sector. They are suitable for entrepreneurs, for SHIs, and then I know we use a lot of acronyms, and part of I guess, the training today will unpack some of these acronyms that are common. We speak about MOEs, that's municipal owned entities, the likes of in Johannesburg, Joshco, Ekurhuleni, or in Tshwane, Housing Company Tshwane. So those are municipal owned entities. We also speak about other delivery agents and SHIs and property companies, but we'll unpack that as the day goes. The training format, it is virtual. It'll be a 2-day of about 3.5 to 4 hours maximum. You are, I guess, encouraged and required to attend both sessions. And through my colleagues, we'll be using surveys and polls during the next 2 days just to also, I guess, gauge a bit of feedback. But I think from our side as facilitators, we want to encourage you to make use of the chat functionality. And if there's anything pressing that you want to also ask, please put up your hand. I think it also just helps with what's the word? The interactivity, right? So it's just not my voice or our voice the whole time. So I'm happy to take questions as we proceed. Mpo and John and the other colleagues will help me with the chats as well. But if somebody has a burning question, we really want to make it as practical as possible. And if I'm also very honest, the first day is quite theoretical in that we speak about legislations, the why, the how. So I guess any opportunities or where something is not clear, let's deal with it. Or if you've got a question, I think day 2 is slightly more practical, and should be a bit easier as well. Then just the last note as well, all presentations will be made available. The SHRA will, I guess, collate all presentations for the 2 days. There's also a manual that comes with a program and or that comes as part of this. And I think the colleagues from SHA will also just make it available and email it to everybody. So please just also make sure that both when you register, but as well as on the survey that Mpo put up, that your email address is correct. So, right, great. All right. So how will we structure the morning? I think everybody's in now. We are just doing welcomes and introductions. We want to get your expectations for the day. And Paul will probably Paul, you'll just let me know once those answers are coming through, and I guess we can kind of see where everybody's at. But I think my role would be just to set the scene, right? What is social housing? But broadly, where does it fit within the South African context? I think we felt that it's quite important that we just don't go in and speak about social housing but we must be clear why the program exists, what other programs are there, what gap are we trying to fill within the housing programs or within the housing ladder. So I will let me do this pointer. Okay, cool. So I will spend a bit of time just setting the scene in terms of, I guess, the South African housing landscape. My colleague Mpho will assist thereafter just around and assist with the social housing policy and legislation. We'll do a tech team there. We'll try and take a comfort break for about 10 minutes at about 11 o'clock. And we'll do a recap from break, and then we'll get into a bit more details on some of the instruments in the social housing program, specifically restructuring zones, if you're familiar with it, some of the capital grants, or not the capital grants itself, and other grants that are available within the SHRA. We'll do a bit of day one recap and discussions and Q&A. But as mentioned earlier, we are happy to take all of those Q&As as we proceed during this program or during this training as well. Any questions about how the day will proceed? Please use your chat. Or yeah, if you just want to maybe put your hand up as well or put your mic, yeah, happy to take that before we proceed. Yeah, I think we're fine. Right. Mpho, I'm just let's see. I do not see the registration link. Okay. Oh, can I actually check? Are you seeing the presentation?
No, Carabello.
No, hey?
We don't have the
Yeah.
presentation on our side.
No, I see that. Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
Then I was going to say, Carabello, while you sharing the presentation, can I maybe try to introduce the people that we have in the platform so that we don't have to do the individual introductions? Is that fine?
Yeah,
Okay.
please proceed, Mpho.
Yes. So not everyone filled out the form on the link, and we would still appreciate it if you can just go and fill it as time goes during the day until us. I mean, we have until 1, so it would be very helpful for us to know who we are working with and who's the target and the audience. So, Karabelo, just a brief. We are joined by consulting services. We are joined by town planners. We are joined by 2 SHIs. We are joined by directors. And all, if I consolidate the expectations are to grow within the Human Settlements Department and access opportunities that would be presented. Also to learn more about the social housing space. And then another one says to unpack the social housing space in SA, the mandate of the SHRA, and the role of SHIs in delivering social housing units. So those are the expectations that we have from the attendees.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mpho. And just also looking at, I guess, the sort of attendees, we're a fairly small group. I think say about 31, probably including ourselves and the SHRA. So maybe over and above, with these virtual setup, normally if this was physical, we'd have the opportunity to interact and exchange business cards or opportunities. I'm hearing we've got town planners, people from SHIs as well. So yeah, let me encourage everybody just to also, if you want to just say in the chat, just so that other colleagues can see who you are or want to reach out directly. Yeah, just also there, if you just can put where you're from. Obviously, I guess by I guess being part of this, it is recorded, so we understand that consent has been provided for I guess people within the meeting to share details. So if you want to do that and just let us know what your services are or your interest in social housing, feel free to chat, and then people can just reach out just to kind of try and also add a bit of in person to the virtual training. Maybe just a question, and the mics are on. Colleagues from SHIs, can I just ask you just if you can either via the chat or through the mic, just let us know which SHI you're from and then how long you've been with that SHI. Pumzile from KZN. Interested in knowing the accreditation process for social housing institution. Noted, Pumzile. I'll respond to that shortly. Cool. Dezo, all right, welcome, Dezo. If you have a project or you're working on projects in KZN, I think if we're not mistaken, we've seen your, I guess, your company around a bit. And maybe for the benefit of colleagues and to respond in detail as well. So Pumzile, so during the next 2 days, I guess we will touch slightly on accreditation just at a principal level. The Shara does run a separate training program on how individuals can register as an SHI, and I'm sure maybe we'll allow the Shra and John space maybe at the end of the day just to kind of remind us when that training will be. And if Mpo also has it, she'll let us know. I think in about 2 weeks' time, there'll be another virtual training session on how to register as an SHI. Yeah, we'll touch on it very lightly. But there's a 2-day virtual training on how to register or be accredited as an SHI. But yeah, I think that's just that. Great. Okay, Larato noted. Larato wants to be a developer in social housing. Got colleagues as well from Free State. Yeah, all right. No, I'm just I think it's Mano Chirudza in the chat saying that some assistant in dealing with extortionists, being an inspiring SHI. So I think that's duly noted. Unfortunately, I think maybe colleagues will share some of their experiences within, but I think on our side, yeah, I guess we can share some high level experiences of other SHIs. But it's a topic and something that obviously requires I guess the arm of the law to also operate, but it's how you gear yourself. But I've made a note of that, and we can see how we touch on it during the day. Great. Okay. So I'm going to move on and to the presentation. Just to start the scene. We go. Okay, the market, right? So I guess social housing is one of the housing programs within the context of other housing programs in the country, both in the private sector and public sector. So we want to spend maybe about 15 to 20 minutes just contextualizing the South African housing environment. In particularly, I guess, just where housing is nationally across the country, but and the role that social housing plays. So just to kind of set the scene, and before we get into the nitty-gritties of how the legislation works. Just as a precursor, I think from a government perspective and as I guess South Africans, we are saying that it is highly unacceptable for people to live in conditions as you see in the photo, right? What you have, this is a typical hostel type. It could be a bedroom, but essentially, just to point out, it's Looks about 14 squares at most. We've got, I guess, two ladies and a baby. At the bottom, you should be seeing a bit of a bath. So implying that these are not, they aren't bath facilities necessarily in the product, or in this accommodation. It's shared. You can sort of see, I guess, some of the dangers, the states of the walls. I think from a program perspective, and a department and a national perspective, I think we are saying that this is not acceptable. People should not be sort of living in these type of conditions. And this is one of, I guess, the reasons why the government has the social housing program, as well as other housing programs to assist low income earners. We don't see the, can I confirm? Sorry, I'm just seeing, can I get a thumbs up if others are able to see the presentation? I see Batlalifeng is not seeing it. Okay. Thank you. Right, Batlalifeng, maybe others are seeing the presentation. Please let us know if you're still stuck. Maybe come out of the meeting and come back in. But I think on the majority, the presentation is visible. Okay, and Ms. Kubai as well. All right. Okay. So in setting the scene, right? So what is the size of the South African property market? And what is the context or size of the social housing market as well? So these are important questions because the social housing market is a subsector of the entire market. It's a very small component, if we may add, of the total market share. But essentially, let's say property market value is about 6.7 trillion, of which about 6.9 million of properties in SA are resi. And residential makes just approximately 90% of total properties, right, across the country. And this makes a lot of sense. We've got, I guess, a lot of suburbia, a lot of townships, and then you have small pockets of commercial and industrial. So intuitively, it would make sense that about 90% of properties in South Africa are residential properties. What we also know from research is that, South Africa is one of the most urbanized countries in Africa. And what we mean by urbanized is that, I guess the inverse being rural, right? So you either live in an urban area, or I guess the other side of the equation would be a rural area. So South Africa is a highly urbanized country. Probably up there with the likes of probably a Morocco, I would imagine. Nigeria to a smaller extent, but probably also Egypt as well, would be urban, some of the most urban, I guess, countries in Africa. But what is staggering for us is the stats just around almost 3/4 of SA's population are living in urban areas. And only just around say 33 odd percent of South Africa's population is living in rural areas, right? And the forecast is that by 2030, 72% of South African population will be living in urban areas. And why this is important is that it's important from a planning perspective, as government plans, as we plan around where we want to live. We're seeing a lot of natural migration because of job opportunities. So families will migrate from rural areas, and I'm going to pick on Limpopo and Eastern Cape, because probably also the Northwest. I think those are, KZN has a large rural component. And what we find, it's a natural migration of South Africans from predominantly rural areas to urban areas. This can be both within, I think, the same province, but it can also be across provinces, right? So you find people from the Eastern Cape moving to, I guess, the bigger cities in Eastern Cape, but also moving to the Western Cape as well, and big cities like be it it's Cape Town, Stellenbosch, or others. So there's a high population migration in South Africa, and this is very much driven by economic opportunities. People are looking for job opportunities, people are looking to better their lives, and you are, I think, more likely to find such opportunities in urban areas. Okay, let me try and Paul, just if you look out for and help with the mute. Okay, great. So there's a natural migration, and this is not, I guess, unique to South Africa. It happens across the world, but I think from an Africa perspective, we're leading, right? But also, if we look at the rental market itself, we have, I think, fine at a population level. South Africa has about just under 18 million households, right? So households being a household, not individuals. I think our population at last count was around 62 million odd, but it's about 17.8 million households. Out of these households, just around 23% live in rented dwellings, rented apartments, rented houses, and 72%, as we said earlier, are expected to be living in urban areas. So this becomes important from a social housing perspective. And as we move through the program today, and emphasize that the social housing program is an urban program. It's not a program that is implemented in rural South Africa, but it's a program that government has, I guess, designed to also respond to some of these very, I guess, practical and natural migrations and development of South Africa, where people are moving from rural areas to urban areas. But really, I think, yeah, this slide, and we've also put the sources. I think some of the sources are Lightstones, that's SA, and UN Habitat Report, but it's really to contextualize the urban environment. I'm sure in the room, one would dare say 98% of us are connecting somewhere from an urban area. And that really speaks to the demand. You don't have to, you just merely drive around in our cities or in your areas, to see the migration. In Johannesburg, I guess we are mostly in urban environments, and people are moving from townships or from rural areas, and they would even move to places like Alexander, Clayville, and others, just so that they are closer to economic employment opportunities, and that's quite a critical component of the program. Yeah. So just from a dwelling perspective, we just want to show, in addition to saying that, the amount of, I guess, rental dwellings in the country, or the percentage of people that are in rentals. What we want to show then is also the spread between private rentals as well as government-led rentals, right? So what the stats tells us is that we've got about 4,300 number of rental units across the country that are in the sort of the private sector, that are privately driven, be it, I guess, institutional landlords like EFCO, City Property, Diversity, that are, and even private individuals, right? So if you are renting your own property out, and similar, there's about 4,300 of those across the country. And out of these 4,300, or in addition to the 4,300, the public sector accounts for only approximately about 400,000 units in the market for rental. And this is important from just understanding the context of the market too. If you think these rental opportunities delivered by the private sector, what's the asking rental, right? Can I go and I guess find a rental opportunity in an urban area for, I don't know, 2,500, for 1,500? Are these private landlords trying to maximize their rental income, or are they doing this for good? right? Is there a societal initiative or a societal good that they're trying to achieve, as compared perhaps to the public sector or the public stock that's available? What is the purpose of it, and then what does it serve? And those are some of the key things that we'll unpack during the course of today. Cool. Then on the next slide, just giving a breakdown of the spread of the rental stock itself, right? So we said 4,300 units are public, are privately owned, and just only about 400,000 units are privately owned, right? So what makes up this 400,000 in the public sector? Primarily, there are probably oh yeah, this should be true. There are three programs that exist within the human settlements unit. I think the largest one is with about 300 units, and this is according to the Department of Human Settlement Statistics. There's some small discrepancy, but we'll manage that. The majority of the bulk is municipal stock, other municipal stock, and this would have been stock that was inherited, I think, post-apartheid, or where what you find is in different municipalities, there's stock owned by the municipality for staff. So that makes up quite a lot, and it's approximately around 300,000. There's another government program called CRU, Community Residential Units. And that is now around 30,000 rental units that are available. So the CRU is the old hostel programs, depending on where you're from. Historically, I guess with apartheid spatial planning, we found that in different, I guess, towns, you had these what we called hostels. I know in Umlazi, you go into Umlazi, you find hostels. Sort of in Soweto, there's some hostels. I think it might be Kliptown side. In Mamelodi, you go into Mamelodi, you find hostels. So this was part of, I guess, apartheid spatial planning. And now these hostels are slowly being converted or upgraded. And government now calls that no longer hostels. I think historically you would find single sex. Now they're also then being converted into family units. Then I think the last one here, sorry, that's not private sector rentals, about 37,000 units in the country are social housing units. And this is, I guess, the market that we operate in. This is the market that the Social Housing Regulatory Authority, I guess, does regulate, enables, and invests in, right? But I think what we want to just emphasize, I think, with the past two slides is, I guess, the small ratio of public government stock as a function of, I guess, the total, call it housing opportunities, but even also as a percentage of rental stock that's available, right? So if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm sitting across the table, I'm like, okay, all right. So if there's only 37,000 across the country, I'm trying to think, maybe somebody will help me in the chat. What is the size of, I think F&B, what is the size of F&B Stadium? Is it 90,000? Or is it 60,000? 90, there we go. All right. Okay, I'm sure we've got, no, all right, about 90. All right, great. No, 100,000 capacity sounds like overcrowding, we would say, in the social housing sector, which we don't want stampedes. But yeah, let's go with 90. Thanks, Tepo, Pretty, and Batlhalifeng. But yeah, just to contextualize, 37,000 is actually not a lot, right? Obviously, the practicalities of it is that while we say there's 37,000 units in social housing, we are housing 37,000 households. And an average household in South Africa is about 3.5 odd people that would stay in a house, I think. So I guess the numbers would be the 37,000 by say 3.5. Let me actually do it here, just for interest. So if we say 37,000 units by 3.5, so it's approximately about 130,000 people that are living in social housing units. So yeah, I think with a bit of overcrowding, it's just slightly above the number of people that you would see in FNB during a Pirates and Chiefs game. Just on average, right? If you add the people that bought tickets and that didn't buy tickets, maybe the number is 100,000 or 120,000. But yeah, I think, just to that's the point, just to contextualize the size of the social housing program, but also to I guess get you thinking about the opportunities to an extent as well, both as an entrepreneur, as an SHI, as an aspirant SHI, or somebody who wants to operate within the sector. To say that there is a big gap in housing, there is big opportunities, and importantly, it serves a purpose in saying, let us move people from rural areas into the urban context. And the social housing program is designed specifically for that. But we'll get into, I guess, into those details. Just want to see. Yeah. So this is there's a few things going on this slide, and if you allow me to explain it, actually just a colleague developed it quite recently. So on the left side, we are showing, I think the axis is number of households. On the right side is percentages. Then what we're showing on the graph is South Africa's income distribution, right? And this will come clearer as we go. So if I look at the first bar graph here, is what Stats SA is saying is that there are about, if correct, just under 1.5 million households that have no income in South Africa. So that's how you would read it, the 1.484. I'm going to round it up. And the percentage is about 9%. So between 0 and 1,850, there are 26% of South African household earn between this income bracket. And I'm going to say that slowly and again. So between 0 and 1,850, we have 26% of South African households that have that income, and the number of the number of individuals or households is the 4.5, and it goes on and on and on like that. So I think I'll just let's see. I'll just explain this one within the red. So equally between households that earn between 11,300 and 22,000 make up 9% of South Africa's population, essentially, right? And that's about 1,500 households, give or take. And in red, what we've boxed here is where the social housing market is, right? So in the details, the social housing program caters for people earning from 1,850 up to 22,000 rand gross income household per month. But what we want to show here, or the purpose of this, is to say, if you look firstly at a distribution level, we are, with the exception of people that earn less than 1,850, the program itself is sort of in the mid-tier, right? So it's only those below 1,850 and those above 22,000, which is 6 plus 5, which is about 11% of South Africa's household that earn above 22,000. That the social housing program does not cater for, but everybody else, on the majority, we cater for. And you would qualify for social housing, but really, I think the point of this slide in particular is to kind of show also the potential of the market, right? So if you're saying I'm an entrepreneur or I'm an SHI developer, What is the size of the market? Is there opportunities? Will I find tenants? Obviously, these figures are national, and there would naturally be a spread across provinces, across towns, and you would do your own demand studies to assess your demand. But just as a starting point, I think that the sort of the point of the slide is to kind of show you that. Let's think quickly. Yeah, give or take, let's see. Yeah, we are servicing a significant portion of the market. I just want to get my calculator back. Calculator. So if we quickly do the sum, just on the left, right? So I'm gonna add the income, the percentage income, 19, 15, 13, and 9. So let's do this. That's 19 plus 15 plus 13 plus 9. That's 56, right? So 56% of households, is that right? Yeah, that's about right. 66% of I guess the income distribution or households in South Africa would qualify for social housing. So already you have, I guess, a good chunk of a potential market that fall within the income bands that are earning an income to pay. But I think it's a localization of whether people qualify or what is the local regional details in as far as income is concerned and what sort of accommodation they would stay for. So I think, yeah, just to kind of set the scene around both income across the country, but also, the rental product versus the, I guess, I think, yeah, versus, both public and private rental products, but broadly then to say, okay, this is where the social housing market is vis-a-vis the income distribution household. Maybe I'm going to take a pause there and ask if there's any questions in particular with this presentation or this PowerPoint slide. It's one of the first time that we're showing it. And yeah, just maybe I guess it would be good to get some feedback if it's clear or if it makes sense, or if it doesn't make sense, or if there's any component that we can clarify. Maybe a thumbs up, a thumbs down as well.
Okay, I've enabled the mics, so
All right, cool.
if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask the question or comment also. But this is quite an insightful one, Karabelo. I think it does place a very clear picture in terms of the size of the market that we need to address. And I'm sure later on you will tell us where we currently sit in terms of performance. Yeah, the numbers
Right,
are
we'll
quite
bring
scary.
that up. No, we've got it. Yeah, thanks, John. Go ahead, Lerato.
Thank you so much, Karabelo. This is wonderful market research. I just wanted to find out if it's possible to get provincial data or municipal data on, the social housing market, in various provinces.
Okay.
And also, my second question is, does it I understood that the focus is to, address the urban, question. Now, does it exclude, provinces that are classified as rural provinces? Because within those provinces, there are also pockets of urban areas. And I just wanted to just understand that. Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the question, Lerato. So I'll start with the last one. So I guess, yes, certainly we emphasize, I guess, that this is an urban program. But I agree, and we agree with you, and so does the program, that you find these sort of rural provinces But within the rural province, you also then find urban areas. So you do find that, or it is allowed to have social housing in a rural province, but in an urban town. So, and maybe I must emphasize that sort of the implementation criteria for social housing is at a local level. So we would look at call it the local municipality or a demarcation quite locally at the last level. To say, I just want to think of an example. In Northwest, the Rustenburg is fairly ruralish. No, okay, Rustenburg is not a province. Northwest is a fairly rural, province, but Rustenburg is urbanized, right? So yes, you've got mining, you've got economic activity, large tracts of urban areas, fine, some tracts of urban areas. And in Rustenburg is a restructuring zones, and we'll speak about these zones a bit later as well, to say that there are pockets of zones that not we, but that have been identified for the implementation of social housing. And that is across the country, irrespective of the nature of the province or the demarcation classification. But then the program looks specifically at the local context to say you can have social housing in Rustenburg, but you might not have social housing in, I'm going to pick, I think, in Kurumane, like a heavily agricultural town in the Northwest. I'm trying to think in other provinces, equally so, in Northern Cape, you'll find we can do social housing in Kimberley, but, not necessarily in the outskirts a bit. I know you go further down Kimberley, then you sort of get to slightly urban or where the minings are, which is slightly urbanized. But yeah, I think the short answer, Lerato, is that we look at it at a local level as compared vis-a-vis the provincial level. Then the question on municipal and local data. So yeah, to a small extent, the data is available. But maybe what I should emphasize is what the SHRA does, and John will help me if it's on the website, is that over the last few years, they've also done demand studies across a number of areas of interest or provinces of interest. And when they do these demand studies, it's sort of, it'll be a good first level filter before you go and pay a service provider to say that you are looking for a demand study for a local area. So, the SHRA is actually, they make it available on their website. You can say, okay, here's are some of the high level demand studies, which will contain some data at a municipal level or at a local level around, I guess, call it income distribution, demand for housing, and such. So I'm just looking research reports. I just want to see. John, are you still there? Are those demand studies for some of the provinces, are they available online? Like I remember Northern Cape and a few others. Okay, cool. All right, maybe John will come back, but yeah, just before, I think the data is available. The SHRA makes some high level demand studies available that would speak to some of this data. I think, yeah, I guess generally we would I guess get it from Stats SA or a subscription service as well. But there are some, sort of publicly available information. Mpho, if I can ask you maybe in the chat as well, because the questions related would be related to how much where are the social housing projects across the country. Maybe, yeah, I think it's a good platform to say that, I think through the SHRA and some few partners, there is a website which is publicly available. And the current phase of that website is to make public the data on social housing delivery, right? So you can see on the website where existing social housing institutions are across the country. And you can also see where the planned social housing projects are across the country. The website is www.socialhousingportal.org.za. But I've asked, I think my colleagues will also just put it down on the chat. And that's another easy tool that you can use to look at. Thanks, Mpo. Mpo has just put it on the chat to also look at, okay, say, where is the current supply? Because it's a demand and supply question, right? So if you go on the website, you'll then be able to navigate and toggle and see where existing projects are, where some planned projects are, and then you can also make some informed decision to say, hey, there seems to be a gap in the Northern Cape. How come there's only, I don't know, 400 social housing units? Do I want to operate in social housing in that market? Or you look in the Free State as a province, in Bloemfontein, we've got that data there that shows existing stock as well as what is being planned. So I would encourage you to make use of that social housing portal as well. Cool. Just going through the comments. Thanks, Zenith. Yeah. Then Nomalungelo just also in the chat just saying that just I guess some feedback on the slide that it's interesting, but it requires to look into urban because you are in rural areas. Yeah, I think and we've more or less covered that. And then you might not have to go outside of your province to find an urban area. But yeah, there's a very specific locations. But yeah, we'll also just there. I think in the post session, or I think when I come afterwards, I'll spend a bit more time on the different restructuring zones and how to maybe find them to know that this is the particular area that social housing can operate. Thanks, Lerato. Cool. Any other question just on the few slides that we've gone through before I move on to, I guess, the next maybe 3 slides or so? Yeah, thumbs up. What do we have? So yeah. So in setting the scene of demand, supply, and income, one, I guess, especially when you look at the lower income, and maybe I'll go a step back as well, right? So if you look at this, the highest proportion of South African households essentially are earning a very low income, right? And when you then think historically from a spatial planning and an apartheid systems perspective, is that a majority, if not all of these people, were forced to live in townships and travel or commute into urban areas for employment opportunities. So now that we are post 1994, how do we enable them to live in urban areas? Do they earn enough to live and rent in, I don't know, in Midrand, in Marlborough, in Morningside, Durban, I'm trying to think of a province, in Nelspruit CBD, or across the country, right? So if I'm earning between 3.5 and 6, or if I'm earning 1.8 to about 3.5, can I afford to live in an urban area in a self-contained unit that has a kitchen, a toilet, or does government have to respond and say, no, Mr. Poe, you are earning too little, but that should not force you to live in a back room or in conditions, right? In sort of bad conditions. And what then happens, I think, from a housing and a government perspective, is that the government will then say, okay, we need to intervene in the housing sector because the private sector, which was at least at a rental level as well as at an ownership level. So the rental sector, which was about, we said, I think about 4 million odd units, they will respond and charge the highest possible rental. So that would still be exclusionary. So I think that the purpose of this slide really is to show some of the housing products that are available, and where government is intervening, right? So we had a portion of, I guess, people that had no income or had very limited income. So I'll just go one slide back. So these will predominantly be these, right? So from 1,850 to below, or to these 9% of households in the country that have no income, and to a small extent, these ones as well. So government would then respond and say, okay, cool, what can we do to offer these housing? And those could be people with no fixed income. Those could be people on some of the sort of the grants that have recently been introduced. And some of the, I guess, some of the rental products or the housing products available would be emergency accommodation. We speak about transitional or dormitory beds. In large metros, you find this to be more common. Cape Town, City of Cape Town, City of Johannesburg, where one can pay 15 randa or 50 rand. I must check now where the numbers are, and you can get a bed to sleep, right? So if I'm a car guard, our local municipalities have provided a product for me to sleep overnight so that I'm safe, I'm warm. So this is sort of the temporary emergency accommodation, transitional accommodation, and dormitory, primarily for people with no fixed, secure income. Then we've got low income individuals, I guess, we start having communal rooms where I'm renting, but I'm sharing communal facilities, which makes the product a bit more affordable. Earlier on, I spoke about community residential units or the historical hostels, for the target low income people, but with income, right? And with income certainty. These products are primarily also run by municipalities. And then as we go higher, along the scale, this is, I guess, where the market starts to operate, right? So government, has to intervene here by providing services. And as we go up here, there is still some government intervention. Student accommodation is there, which is private sector driven. Social housing, we operate there as well. Then you get private sector accommodation, so middle to high, which would then sort of cost much more. But I think the purpose of the slide is to show that sort of on the lower income, government has to intervene, and they have an obligation to intervene. Otherwise, people will be left out. And social housing is one of those government intervention programs as well, in the market, to make rental accommodation affordable, and once again to sort of move people from rural areas to urban areas so they can become economically active. Yeah. And yeah, I guess maybe as well, the light point on this as well is, based on your income, the typology changes as well. So typology referring to the type of units, whether it's a one bed, a shared facilities, self-contained or non-self-contained. So, but as you go up, the product also, I guess, grows or enhances, or it gets bigger to respond from a return or a feasibility perspective. Yeah, cool. I think just looking at the time, I think that from a setting the scene perspective, that is more or less, I think, what we wanted to lend, just to I guess call it open the morning. But maybe just a question from my side, if I can ask it in the chat. Let's see quickly. So we spoke a lot about what is available, right? So I spoke about, I guess, urbanization. We spoke about rental accommodation. We spoke about private sector rentals, what is available. But can anybody help us out with what is not available? What is the current estimated housing backlog in the country? I don't know, Paul, do you have a prize for us? Whoever gets the answer, or the top three that gets the answers right. Okay, 4 million, Tabo. Thank you. Noted. Any takers? Do we think Tsepo is too low or too high? Guys, this is like the lotto, hey? What's your wild guess? You might just win a prize, or you might sort of spend a small little bit of data. Okay, Batla Lefeng coming in at 2.3 million, half of Tsepo's number. Anybody in between or higher or lower? All right, we've got two trading between 2.3 million and 2.4 million between Thomas and others, 2.7. Okay, cool. Pretty also at 2.4. So 2.4 seems to be coming up a bit. 2.4, 2.3, we'll say more or less it's within the same ballpark. We must ask an old human settlement student, Mpho, Tsiane, what is the housing backlog? Right, let's see. Let's see if we can get the answer here. All right, cool. 2.4 million is the answer, I think. So anything between 2.3, 2.4 million is the housing backlog in the country. So yeah, we've got who was closest. Pretty was probably spot on. Batlhalefeng, Tsapo, you are very generous, 4 million. That's probably the realistic number. And yeah, I think, Mpotiane or 3.5. Mpho maybe knows, I guess, some stuff that we don't as well. But yeah, I guess according to the department, and then we must emphasize where the number comes from, right? To be counted as somebody with a housing need in South Africa, the primary data source that is used is the National Housing Needs Register. So it's I guess it's a portal or an application process by the department. And I must go as Karabelo or Mpho or Nikki, I must go register and say I have a housing need. So like the driver is us going in and registering and saying I have a housing need. So between say at the latest by end of 2023, the number is 2.4 million. So if you think about it practically, though, you must ask, right? So when you look at the amount of homeless people that we see on the streets, have they registered on the housing needs register? Do they have access to computers, or are they going to the department to register with a housing need, or and register themselves? But also even in rural areas and other urban areas. So it's the same thing as how we count unemployment in South Africa, right? So there's the if you are still looking for a job, you are considered unemployed. But the moment you stop looking for a job and you become despondent, we no longer count you. Therefore, our unemployment rate is, and I haven't checked it in a while, what, 42 odd? I can't recall. Percent. It's yeah, sort of the mid 40s. But that excludes people that have gave up on looking for a job. And yeah, so it's the same concept. But yeah, I think colleagues, I think yeah, those numbers are good. And I think intuitively, that number is probably in the three to fours, I would think. But I think the official number that the government says is the 2.4 billion as at about 2023. And maybe for interest, the highest distribution of that number would be in Gauteng, right? So Gauteng has the highest number of registered households on the national database. Let's see quickly. All right, we've got questions from Pretty. I just want to read. The demand supply earlier, 2.4 million demand, and the population will double in the next 58 years. Do you think supply will catch up with the demand? Yeah. No. So the question is, will supply ever catch up with demand, right? And then that's a very good question. So yeah, the pragmatic answer, and colleagues, if you have any different thoughts, please share, is yeah, in the South African context, it won't. Um, so and you look at a few variables. One, population growth. Supply side is low. And if I recall correctly, I think for the intention of government on the government program, not even the private sector program, was to do about 150,000, between 120 and 150,000 units per year. And we are nowhere delivering 150,000 units across government programs, be it BNG, be it the crew program, be it the social housing program. I think the social housing program, we probably, and we'll bring up the stats maybe after lunch, or after break, we do, if we are lucky, about 3.5 per year, between 2.5 and 3.5 social housing units per year. So if I look at the delivery, we will not, unfortunately, we won't catch up, and yeah, that's just an unfortunate reality. So I think from a response perspective, we must then start thinking about both a response from the private sector, but as well as a response from public sector. But we actually just will not catch up, unfortunately, and it's a sad reality. It's probably also not unique to South Africa, just to also be fair, but the extent of it could be, I guess, quite unique, especially when you think about the amount of people that we have with very low incomes. And the private sector will never, ever respond to that particular market. So it's only up to government and public sector and guys like the SHRA and municipalities that must respond. So yeah, I think my straight answer, Pretty, is pragmatically, we won't. But yeah, maybe it's AI. I don't know how. Maybe we'll start building machine properties that take or residential units that are far quicker and adapted. But if you look at if I even just look at the budget from the department and the delivery and the growth rate, unfortunately we just won't. And yeah, it's very sad, to be honest. Cool. Yeah, just maybe a sort of the two closing slide linked to what we said, right? So price sensitivity is a critical consideration and remains an important aspect for tenants. So if I'm a tenant, or tenants and households are highly price sensitive. And the second consideration that one would then consider as a tenant is security. And then I think third and fourth in the list would be distance to work, schools and shops, right? This is a sort of a code from CAF, but anybody who's sort of been in the property management space or property development space, especially in the urban areas, will say that we'll share this and agree with it, that I think if you go to any potential tenant when you're marketing your project, the first question is price. It is not that how secure it is, how much am I paying? That question is even extended to how much are utilities, right? Yes, my rent might be 3,000 rand, but how much do I pay for rates and taxes? Do I pay for water, electricity, storage? And how much does that contribute? So I think that just sort of speaks to the sensitivity of tenants, and will speak to the impact of that in social housing. Then especially in the urban environment or inner cities, security is critical. We don't want to lose goods. We want our children to be in a safe, secure environment. I want to know that if I've left and locked my door, I will find my goods there. So security is the second highest consideration, then followed by the rest. So when you're doing your project, pricing is important. If you overprice, you won't have tenants. Even if you overprice, but it's in a secure place that is very close to work, shops, and schools, people will rather live slightly further or would rather live, even if it's in the same area, but pay less. I think we are in the economy that we are in. Cool. And that brings us nicely to, I guess, the social housing intent, because we've spoken quite a few things and sort of a few themes, right? And for me, this sort of this presentation is quite good because, or the slide just speaks to a few sort of key themes of the social housing program and its intent. Essentially, we're saying that we want social, economic, and spatial integration. So social, referring to, I guess, peoples and persons and areas. Economic, people must be in areas where there's economic activity, but most importantly, spatial integration. So integration from, I guess, and the simplest version would be, we had spatial layout or spatial planning that was in apartheid, where we said, I guess the poor, the non-whites live in the periphery. And now we want the intent of the social housing program is for spatial integration. And some of the, I guess, access to health, transport, and others. We want people to live in safe neighborhoods. But essentially, where within where you live, that being, I guess, a typical project, you must be close access to your work opportunities. We don't want people traveling far. It costs money to travel. It must be safe for children to play, so it must be a safe space for children to grow your family, but also pray, right? So I think the majority of South Africans are, sort of, I guess, they're religious in some form or other. And from a social housing perspective, we want to make, we want to create and develop a program and projects where people can live close to all of these different amenities. It's quite important. And that's sort of a nice little summary of the intent of the social housing program. It wants to integrate people spatially, economically, and socially. And socially, obviously referring to also the income across, right? So we want people that whether you are earning 3,000 or whether you're earning 22,000 or 15,000, you must live in the same community and be afforded the opportunity to live in the same building, irrespective of your income. Cool. I think, let me see quickly. Very briefly, I think, this is still my slide. History of social housing. I just want to check my notes. Just a very brief slide before, and this will lead us to the next section, which Paul will take on. It's just a sort of a high level timeline of the social housing program. I think, for those, I think we came obviously from, I guess pre-1994 in how do I say it, apartheid South Africa. And at a legislation or a framework level, the new government had to put in frameworks and policies and on how we're going to change, I guess, the country at a number of different areas, but including housing. But there was a sort of a framework between 1995 and 2000, a lot of discussion documents, National Housing Forum, we had the Constitution, we had the Housing Act around 1997, and sort of later 1999, 2000, we had the Rental Housing Act as well. So I guess there we just want to say, I think coming out of 1994, there was a lot of new legislation, both at a national level, like the Constitution, but also at different programs level, i.e., including the Housing Act as well as the Rental Housing Act as well. I think later on we'll speak to the the amended Rental Housing Act. But after 2000, if this slide is clear, this is more or less when, I guess, the social housing program itself was introduced. This is when the Social Housing Act was introduced, but initially it didn't start as the Social Housing Act. We had support program, we had policies, Equally as well, around 2004, this is when the BNG, or the Breaking New Ground, or RDP program was introduced in the early 2004, 2005. Then from 2006, the social housing program, was in its interim stages. We did not yet have a social housing act. That comes in a bit later, but there was an interim program where, let's call it, there was an interim SHRA called the Social Housing Foundation, and they were the sort of the precursors to the SHRA. But yeah, so this, I guess sort of this era between 2000 and 2004, the narrative changed to human settlements as a theme. We don't just want to create housing where people live, but we want to create human settlements where people are living and flourishing. So that was, I guess, the era of human settlements, and sustainable human settlements being a key word, and delivering, most in, I think, sort of quite hard, the BNG program. Then after 2006 to 2007, I think what's worth emphasizing here is that, the Social Housing Act of 2008 came in around 2010, a revision of some of the housing code, some of the legislation, and 2010 was the establishment of the SHRA. So the SHRA is a fairly new organization. Okay, 14 years, right? So that will make it a teen. It's in its teenager years. Hopefully not trying to figure itself out too much, but yeah, it's a teen. It's coming to being. We have experience in the sector. We know what works, what doesn't work. And all of those lessons, I guess, are being observed and absorbed by the sector. But I think sort of most interesting to worth emphasizing here, and outside of 2005 pluses now, from a housing delivery perspective, there's a review of everything that happened from the beginning to now, right? So the department and the stakeholders are talking about what we call a white paper on human settlements, which is still in draft. But essentially that white paper will then translate in a series of new legislation and housing codes that would then inform maybe what the new Social Housing Act might be, what the CREW program might be, what we are doing with informal settlements and other different housing programs. So there is a sort of a big legislative change and consultation by the Department of Human Settlements. And that, I guess, yeah, that we're not seeing yet in the screen, but just be aware of possible changes within, within our operating environment, and the white paper in particular. We won't dwell too much on some of the sectoral challenges. I think the slide we've just put there, just so that it also, I guess, sort of stimulates some thinking, to say that let us not necessarily already at this early stage paint everything gloomy and say there's a big market and big opportunities. But there are challenges, yeah, I think we'll, as the day proceeds, and in particular for tomorrow, as we get to the really practical stuff, we'll speak to some of these sectoral challenges, and maybe I'll just highlight one or two. We speak about tenure options, tenure referring to, am I renting, am I owning, am I renting to buy? We're speaking about, I think, sort of one of the challenges is around the financing of social housing. And later on, I'll speak to the grant, but you do get a grant, but you also need to go out and look for either debt. You go to funders, or you say, no, I've got some money. I've inherited a couple of millions. Here's my equity. I'm going to invest it. But essentially, I guess there's a big concern or big challenge around how social housing is funded, especially on the debt side, right? So where maybe some of the financial sector players are saying we don't understand this project or this program called social housing. It's highly risk, and we won't fund it. So there's some limitations. Even us as delivery agents, be it SHIs or ODAs, there isn't necessarily, what we've observed is sometimes there's not enough capacity or understanding of the program, which results in distress, the need for intervention, and interference from other stakeholders, be it councillors at a local level or municipalities or provinces. So I think the social housing program is while it's great, does have challenges, but there are very few programs in the country that you find don't have challenges. But this is just I guess just the summary of some of the challenges, but we'll really unpack them. And we're also keen to hear of some of the challenges that you might have experienced, right? In your journey in social housing, be it it's at a starting level or be it you are in construction. We're keen to kind of hear some of that, and some of that feedback just goes to the SHRA and the department. But I'm gonna take a sort of a break there just to take any questions while I allow Mpho to also set up, and she'll take us through some of the policies and programs and legislation framework. If there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I just want to see, Thomas has a question in the chat. Current rate of housing delivery per year. Okay. Thomas, I'll have a look. I know we've got that number as well. So I'll maybe when Mpho is presenting, I'll just check that number. I don't have it offhand. Just broadly delivery. I guess intuitively for me, I guess on the top of my tongue, I know the number for social housing delivery, but not the delivery of housing across per year. And the number for social housing varies per year, but we'll bring a slide. We've got that slide up as well. We'll bring that, depending on the year, it is the target has been about 3,500 to 3,000 social housing units per year that have been delivered. I think this year the number might be much lower, but we can look at the historical delivery. And I'll bring that slide just look for the data just elsewhere on the total housing delivery by government per year. So have a look. Mpho?
Hi, Karabelang here.
All right, cool. So everybody, we are good. Maybe a thumbs up, a thumbs down. Our audio still looking good. Our presentation is still available. Maybe just want to check with you if this section is clear or there's any questions as well. Thanks, Thomas, Tabile. Right, good. All right, Mpho, I'm gonna stop sharing. Let me just stop sharing for a second.
You're gonna fly the presentation again, wasn't it? After the few seconds.
Yeah. Do you want me to reflight it for you, or you will?
Please. Thank you.
All right, I can do it. All right, there you go. All right, cool. All right, I'm gonna do this. Yeah. Go for it, Mpho. I'm gonna put my camera off.
Okay, no, thank you, Karaben. Before I start, I just want to confirm if we are all comfortable and we do not have any questions for Karabelo before we move into the next session. Can I just get a thumbs up that we are moving? Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session today.
All right, Mpho,
can you hear me?
Maybe a second. Yeah, we can. I saw a hand from Loazi. I just want to confirm was that a hand or a thumbs up, or maybe there's a question before you proceed.
Thought it was supposed to be a thumbs up.
All right. No problem. Thanks, Loazi. Go ahead, Mpho.
Thank you, Karabo. I was just sending my gratitude for the opportunity. So today I will be exploring the journey and the principles as well as the legal framework for the social housing in South Africa. Whether you are new in the sector or looking to deepen your understanding, this section will provide insights that are gonna be very positive and but how do I say it? Yeah, that are going to be positive for you as I now reflect to the expectations that everyone had earlier on submitted. So as many of you know that in South Africa, we face a very significant housing challenge with millions of households that are still in need for the affordable and secure and well-located housing options. And honestly, these challenges stem from the historical inequalities and economic pressures for the people that are earning below 1.850 and 22,000. So the social housing approach, just before I begin with the framework, the social housing approach is designed to meet all the challenges that South Africa had in terms of housing pre and post 1994. So unlike any housing initiative, social housing focuses in providing affordable housing, quality rental housing in well-located urban areas, and it also aims to build more than just a home. It seeks to foster inclusive communities and create access to essential services and also to bring people closer to economic opportunities. This is the same slide that Karabelo was referring to when he was demonstrating the intention of what do you call social housing. So we're going to start with this legislation framework where we are exploring the acts and the policies that are governing social housing in South Africa. So following Karabelo's presentation on the timelines of social housing, where he was demonstrating the end of apartheid in 1994 and the adoption of the South African Constitution around 1996 and the Housing Act in 1997, and then the introduction of the Housing Act and the Rental Housing Act. We then, as the housing space or the Human Settlements Department, this was then formed as a framework that is going to govern the social housing delivery in South Africa. So I'm not sure if Karabelo, when we started with defining the social housing, but I believe that the audience is aware of what social housing is. But I'm just going to provide a brief definition. Social housing provide affordable rental accommodation for the low to moderate income household, which are people that are earning between 1.850 and 22,000. The main purpose of it is also to reduce the housing outages shortages and to promote urban integration and address spatial inequalities. And then social housing targets individuals and families who do not qualify for fully subsidized housing or cannot afford our private market rates, as that other slide that Karabalo presented that shows how the private market is set. And then I want to now start with the framework as is. We are now focusing on the Constitution, which was established in 1996, the adoption of the Constitution, which includes Section 26 of the Constitution, where it talks about the right to housing for the South African citizens, and it set the legal obligation for the government to provide.
We lost you, Mpho. Mpho? Yeah, colleagues, if you just give us just a few seconds, we've lost, I see Mpho still on the call, but we've lost her audio. All right, I'll maybe just pick it up, and when her audio is back on. I know I've got other colleagues from Nash on the line. Can you just assist Mpho there, or yeah, just assist Mpho. But okay, Mpho's just jumped out. So while Mpho just hops back in, I'll maybe just sort of speak to the slide, and she'll take over when she's back on. All right, I'll just do that. Okay. So what Mpho is explaining is I guess the legislative framework, right? So how I guess legislation and how the program works. Think of it as a top-down funnel. Oh, somebody. No, all right. Are you back, Mpho? Okay, we see you. Okay, I'll let you back in.
No, wait a minute.
Okay, you are back, Mpho?
Okay. Did you
Right.
all go missing? I also saw that Annalisa and Zenz were also kicked out. I think it was the internet connection.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I was on the Housing Act.
Constitution, yeah, Housing Act.
Yes, I was on the Housing Act. So the introduction of the Housing Act, which was in 1997, it formalizes the government's role in housing provision, and it prioritized the delivery of low-cost housing, and it also established frameworks for housing subsidies and development projects. And then I moved to the housing code. But Karabel, before I move to the housing code,
Yeah.
can I also confirm that I will be doing the updated version, which is the amended one? The amended one, as it was revised, it detailed the social housing program and also lay out the specific guidelines and standards for social housing projects, including the funding mechanism and the regulatory requirements. And then I also want to now move to the social housing part, where it is the policy, the guideline, and the act and the regulations. And before I start going into that, I want to also introduce the SHRA as the governing body in terms of as enforcing the Act on Regulations for Social Housing. So the SHRA began its operation and accrediting social housing institutions as well as MOAs and ODAs and ensuring compliance with the Social Housing Act. So the SHRA also allocates capital grants for social housing projects, supporting the growth of the sector. That I'm saying it in order to cover the part of the social housing. And then as I am going back to the policy itself, I also want to justify that the establishment of the SHRA, it is not only to provide the grants, as I have indicated earlier on. It is also about making sure that our sector is sustainable and our delivery agents are always compliant. Now I am moving to the policy. Karabelo, before I move to the policy,
Yeah.
can we move to the slide that speaks broadly about the policy itself?
Okay, cool. That would be next.
The next one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I need to press. No. Okay, cool. I have to just skip 2 slides. It might be a few slides, eh?
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if it's this one that you're looking for.
It's fine. I can just move in terms of the Social Housing Policy and Act. So when I start with the Act, is to say that the Act was established in 2008 with the primary piece of legislation governing the social housing in South Africa, and it also formalizes the social housing as a distinct form of housing option, which focuses on rental accommodation for the low to moderate income households. And then the objective of that act is to promote the access to affordable housing, is to encourage urban regeneration, is to establish and regulate social housing institutions, ODAs and MOAs. It is also to foster the economic and social diversity. And then in the document of the Social Housing Act, as well as the policy, we will get to be exposed, or as per the guide, go through the Breaking New Ground BNG policy of 2004, It also includes the housing code. It includes the national development plans. And then with the policy, its primary objective is to mainly contribute to the national priority of restructuring South African society in order to address the challenges of the structural and economical and spatial dysfunctionalities of the past. And then to improve and contribute to the overall functioning of the social housing sector space. Thank you, Kabali. Can move to the next one. And then in terms of the restructuring objective, which is one of the components that we look in when we now address the issue of the restructuring zones or the definition of the restructuring zones. One of them is the spatial part. So in most South African cities, poor people or people that are earning the low income, they live in locations that are far removed from economic activities. And then to address that, we are now saying social housing should be allocated in areas that are in urban spaces, and they also have opportunities for the economic activities. And then people end up having access to adequate accommodation where social housing can contribute.
Let's check up on Mpho. Mpho, we've lost you again. Right, colleagues, my mic is on. Right. So I mean, Mpho's connection is dipped. We'll give it maybe 10 more seconds. Can you give us a thumbs up or a comment, Mpho? Because we still see you in the meeting. Okay, we've lost Mpho again. So colleagues, maybe while Mpho is just re-logging back, I just want to go back to, maybe I'll spend, because I think this is also an important slide that I'm sure she would have gone back to. But while she comes back, I can just speak to this as well. So Mpho spoke about the Constitution, the Housing Act, and the Housing Code. She spoke to some detail as well to then say we operate in the social housing program, and how that has come to be is through a number of legislations, right? We spoke about founding documents in my earlier slide, when we said, before there was a Social Housing Act, there was policies and guidelines. So think of it as an engagement, if I can call it that, right? So before the real marriage comes from a primary legislation. So how these things work in legislation, it's the same as how they work in real life. We must court each other and dance first before we commit. So the policies and the guidelines were some of the founding documents before the primary legislation, being the act and the regulation. Maybe out of interest, why you have an act and a regulation, very practically is we tend to find that the act itself is very static, and then or it's not changed regularly, but it's easier to change regulations. So in the setting up of legislation, that'll typically start with an act, and then the regulations themselves are far more detailed, and these would be, I guess, publicly gazetted. Then we also then have subordinate legislation. So this would be legislation that is subordinate to the primary, right? And how subordinate legislation works is it works in that the act and regulation will empower, maybe the SHRA will empower the minister and such to be able to send circulars, directives, and compliance notices, all of these cannot be in contradictory to the primary legislation. They cannot be in contradiction to the Constitution or the Housing Act. But understanding that to publish a regulation or an act just takes longer. I guess the SHRA and the department are empowered to issue directives. I think this is all that we are saying there. And that's for the Social Housing Act. Earlier on, we also spoke about the community residential units or the old hostel programs. That's another program. It has policies, programs, and guidelines. Interestingly, there isn't a primary legislation for it per se, right? So we don't have a hostel act of 2015 or 2010, but we've got a policy and program guidelines. So that's the other, I guess, the other human settlements instruments. But broadly, what we are showing here is some of the, I guess, the legislation that is in operation or in effect that governs both of these. At a province level, we speak about the PFMA. At a municipal level, there's a number of these that we operate within. The Municipal Finance Management Act, that's the MFMA, Municipal Systems Act, Structures Act. But very important and worth emphasizing for social housing practitioners is the Municipal Property Rates Act, because this particular act is what determines for both social housing institutions, private individuals, the powers of municipalities to levy rates and taxes. It also, I guess, by implication, also then, fine. I was going to say, and the Systems Act and others would then give, I guess, the powers around water charges, electricity, and such. But I think a key discussion point lately in the sector is around Municipal Property Rates Act and how high municipal property rates charges impact the social housing industry, right? And to be very practical about it, you are in a social housing property or you're a developer, while you might not be required to pay rates, and this is quite common in residential property, the landlord or the social housing delivery agents must pay Municipal Property Rates Act. Must pay municipal property rates, and they absorb that cost. So in sort of, figuring out where you want to operate in that space, already where you're operating, the Municipal Property Rates Act, as well as the yearly or the annual property rates that are set by municipalities are sort of formulated based on this national legislation. The national legislation allows institutions or municipalities to be able to, to levy rates and taxes. Okay, perfect. So I just got an apology there from Umpo. The connection is just a bit unstable. So I'll continue for I guess sort of the next few slides, if you allow me. So that's at a municipal level. And yeah, I can't overemphasize how important some of these considerations are. But lastly, I just want to speak to this particular slide, or right at the bottom. We also speak about cross-cutting legislation. So this would be legislations or acts that do not only apply to social housing, right? The Rental Housing Act is one. So whether you are in social housing, whether you are in affordable housing, whether you are in luxury housing, the Rental Housing Act governs those, call it contractual relationships between lessee and lessor. And there's currently now an amendment to the Rental Housing Act, but it's gazetted, but not yet implemented. And this is what would say, for instance, that or some of the, I guess, the clauses is around interest on deposit. It's around whether a lessee and a lessor can enter into a verbal lease agreement, if I'm very practical. about it. And the other one is the prevention of illegal eviction, PI, and unlawful occupation. I think the heartache of many private and public landlords, right? So the PI Act being the act that says, can I just throw you out of your property as the landlord if you don't pay my rent? But also, what steps am I supposed to follow as a landlord if I want to evict you? Sort of all of those conditions and requirements and processes are within the PI Act. Cool. Colleagues, is this slide clear? Because it's also, a bit of a busy slide, but it's important that I think, sort of the market understands that when you are operating in social housing or elsewhere, it's not just, you don't just have to adhere to the SHRA or to the Social Housing Act, but there are other pieces of legislation that you must be cognizant of. I'm just trying to think if you want maybe the other example at a municipal level, if you want to operate and say, I'm going to go to municipality and look for a piece of land, you would pretty much then have to be adhering to some of these MFMA in how you receive the land. Was it via public tender? I'm just trying to sort of speak to public, to, I guess, practical considerations. And if somebody just gave you the land in a municipality and said you can build social housing, you just have to check whether it complies, right? And there's also others, municipal asset transfer regulations. But, I think, we are in an environment that is highly legislated. So you just need to be aware. When you're not sure, ask the SHRA, ask others, ask for advice around legal matters. I think we just have a fairly high level understanding of it, but not necessarily all the details. Cool. Can I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down just on clarity on this particular slide as well? Thank you. Okay. So I guess the question is there any other legislation that you think we missed in the slide, right? That could potentially impact you as a social housing developer, as somebody offering services in the sector, or that would actually also apply even outside of social housing, be it any other rental accommodation. Could there be other acts or laws that we've missed out that would be applicable, that I guess, as a tip that we must be mindful of? Can anybody think of anything that construction, regulation, and occupational health and safety? Yeah, thumbs up. So I guess, when you're constructing, there's a whole lot of, I guess, sort of acts and regulations, I must now think, that you have to comply with, but also even post-construction, right? When we are running and managing our buildings, occupational health and safety, OSH, still plays a role, from a safety perspective. So thumbs up, I agree. I guess, construction and building regulations as well. So what about, maybe I must ask the question, and feel free to either use the chat or speak. What about the national credit regulation, right? So if I'm renting, does the credit at NCR, does it apply, or does it not apply? It's a question. And should, I guess, should we, consider it and take it into account? That is one that I'm unsure about. And I guess related to that, the question extends to say, is a lease agreement a credit transaction, right? Because the NCR is the National Credit, or the NCA is the National Credit Act and regulations. but does it apply in our environment? Are we entering into a credit agreement when we are signing lease agreements? Something to think about. Okay, so let's see what do we have. All right, cool. But yeah, Shane, I think I'll leave that question just simmering. Just something that we must just think about. If anybody thinks about other legislation as we go, please let us know. Just also type here National Credit Act, question mark, question mark. The other one is typing in the chat, Consumer Protection Act, right? Would the CPA be applicable to social housing program, or does it not apply? Just also something to think about, and we can pick it up maybe after lunch. All right, Popia, thumbs up. That's protection of personal information, if I recall correctly. I remember when Popia came on, it was a nightmare. But yeah, agreed. Cool. No, 100%. Thanks, Pretty. Colleagues, okay, I'm looking at the time. It's 11 o'clock. I'm going to go through a few more slides. Then I think we want to take a bit of a comfort break for about 10 minutes. Then we can come back. So MPO defined the social housing program. But I think sort of what is maybe important and understated is the emphasis on rental. What is probably understated at the moment, but it is in the definition in the Act, is that it can be a rental or a cooperative housing option. And cooperative housing options were found much earlier in the social housing program, where I think my most simplest explanation is you find like-minded people. You essentially create I'm going to call it a social housing stokvel, right? So you organize yourself into a cooperative, similar to how you find cooperatives in the agricultural sector. And then you would essentially then simply go in and have a cooperative housing option using the grants that are available in social housing. But emphasis, Paul spoke about low income person, level of scale and build form. Really there we're saying that it should not be 1 unit or 2 units or 3 units. It must be at scale. Current social housing projects that we are seeing being delivered are in the region of 1,000 units. We might not see as many of those anymore in the short term, but 1,000, 300, 600. We've got quite a lot in the urban areas or in the cities where somebody buys a building, does a conversion for about 120 units, 180 units. But what's important is the level of scale and built form. Institutional management, institutionalized management speaks to the institutions that are managing the social housing program, right? We spoke about social housing institutions, municipal owned entities, and private sector ODAs. So that's what that means. And these institutions must be accredited, and projects must be in accredited designated restructuring zones. And we'll spend some time as well speaking about restructuring zones. But I think, yeah, Mpo has spoken to that slide. We've covered the policy objectives at quite length, and some of the key, I guess, policy objectives is spatial restructuring. Once again, economic restructuring. The program contributes to job creation, economic revitalization. It's used very well as a program to say, yes, let us bring the program to close to economic opportunities, but the inverse is that there's a capital amount that goes into social housing, right? So when you are building and constructing, it's economic activity, people are getting jobs, they're getting employment, opportunities during construction and even post. But, economic revitalization, also speaking to using the social housing program to revitalize the economy or an area, sort of urban regeneration as well. Typical Joburg inner city, I think, say 2010 and backwards, say in the 20s, 2010, where there was a drive to rejuvenate the economy of Joburg inner cities. We're seeing it in Cape Town. We're seeing in eThekwini trying to do the same. And the social housing program assists in that, or is an instrument, or enables that. We also speak about social restructuring through the mix of different income levels and beneficiary profile, right? So it's not only the rich that must stay together, but we want a mix of culture, of age, of social standing, and so that is what we're speaking about when we speak about social restructuring. I'm going to spend, I think this is an important slide that we just want to spend a few minutes on, right?
No,
So,
I'm not even.
all right. So in a program policy perspective, we spoke about improving the functioning of the housing market and addressing market failures for the poor. We don't want the poor living necessarily only in the periphery, but we want them living in urban areas, right? But practically, how do we do this? Is it possible? How can it done? How does it get done? And when we implement a social housing program, it is very targeted, right? So it targets specific people in specific income, so that there is that social restructuring. But if you allow me to spend 5 minutes before we sort of go on a break on this. So when you're implementing a project, so think about a project of 100 units. John?
On my but seem to be the sound quality from your side. I'm not sure. Please confirm for me if you're picking up. You're okay, not missing anything. But it's just not to call it English, but like noise. I'm not sure that it's just on my side or to say. I thought the call has been going on for quite some time, more than 10 minutes.
Cool.
So I'm not sure. Are you guys able
Let me
to
ask
hear
the colleagues.
Clearly?
Are you hearing me clearly? I know, John, I'm not hearing you clearly, so you are coming as staggered now, so I don't know if it's mine or your, but can we just get some feedback on my connection and my sound?
Can hear Karabelo well, but not John.
Yeah, we can't hear clearly, Chair, on our side as well. Can't hear clearly, Chair.
So, Freddie, that was can't, eh? Was that you can't hear clearly?
Oh, so it's probably,
Yes.
it's probably from
Yes, we can't hear. We cannot hear clearly. It's
Okay.
breaking. It's breaking a lot.
Okay. John was not clear. Okay. Maybe other feedback, other people. We just want to see the distribution of the issue a bit. For Thomas, Olani, okay. I think John, I think my connection is fine. I think it's your side, eh? I think with the exception of Freddie, who also said he's not hearing me clearly.
Probably it's just a network on my end then.
Yeah, there, I think now
probably
it's just improved now.
Sure.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks for that. I'll also maybe just also try and speak a bit louder. Freddie, are you still, is the connection still not so good?
I could hear him properly now when he was responding.
All right.
Let's see how it goes further on here.
No, sharp. And myself, are you hearing me clearly?
I hear you very clearly. I hear you very clearly.
Thank you, sir. All right, 100%. I'll keep my camera off. All right. So yeah, just to go back to this slide. So how do we do all of this, right? So we've got this program. We say it can do miraculous things. It can bring people from the periphery into the urban areas. But is it Tata Zonge, we take anybody and everybody. So no, and this slide, and I'll sort of do right to left it wants to explain how the social housing program is targeted in its intent to bring people, right? So there are checks and balances. There are rules on who qualifies, how many of them can be in a social housing project, how much they must earn, as well as how much we can charge them. So if I read this left to right, fine, this is just number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have what we call rental income bands, right? So this would be the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe let's say this first 2 blocks we refer to as rental income bands. So then the third column is an income spread. And what that means is how many people or what is the percentage of people that earn a particular income that must live in a social housing project or in that particular project. So that's the income spread. The rent code is really an affordability measure, right? It says for a particular income, what must you afford? How much can you afford? I think the one typical example is, I think that we use in South Africa is what if you want to rent, you must earn 33%, or your rental cannot exceed 33%. It's also used, I think, with credit. It's a typical one, but the rent code refers to that. Minimum rental per month, maximum rental per month, and average. So if you read this left to right, and I'll maybe use the first row and the last row. So how social housing program targets particular individuals is to say, if you are earning 1,850 to 3,500, you must be paying, or there must be a maximum of 5% of these category or basket of people. So a maximum of 5%. But also, we don't want to overburden individuals, right? Then we also say, we will then look at an affordability rent code of 27% to determine the rental that you are eligible to pay or that you can afford to pay, because we don't want you to overextend yourself as a tenant. So that's what the rent code means. Then the minimum rental, fine, and we rounded some of these numbers, would then be if you are between 1,850 to 3.5, your minimum rental per month will be give or take about 500 Rand, and we'll do the maths now. Your maximum rental for these individuals will be the 945, but on average, between the 500 and the 900, it's about 722, right? So I'm just going to bring up my calculator again, just to demonstrate this. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so to make this practical again, so especially the rent code part. So if I take somebody who earns an income of 1,850, and you multiply that by the rent code of 27% times 0.27, that gives you 499 Rand 50. So we rounded it up to 500 Rand. So you can pay, if you are earning 1,850 on a rent code of 27%, your minimum rent or your rent that you should be paying is 500, right? That's what that means. And we can do the same with 3,500 times 0.27, which is our rent code, is 945. So this is the maximum that we are allowed to charge somebody who earns 3.5. And that's how you would interpret this. I think maybe also important to say our income bands are based on total household income. So if Karabelo is applying for a property and he comes with a partner, the Shrao or the SHI ODA would look at our household income. So it'll be me and my partner. If our household income exceeds 3.5, we go to the next band and the next band. So yeah, I think that's how you read this, and this is how the SHRA and the program targets individuals. In some of the details, we speak about a primary market and a secondary market. And the primary market being, I guess, the sort of the lower end of the market. So that would be band 1 and band 2. And when we speak about a secondary market, but it's operational, that would be everybody else who earns slightly more. And what you'll notice is the primary market, because they pay the least amount of rentals, they constitute the least amount in the total building, right? So the primary market is 30%, which is people from 1,850 to 6.7. Then the secondary market is everybody after. And we want to have a lot more of these individuals so that they pay a higher rentals. You see the rentals are from 5,000 on the band 5 to about 6.4. So we need a lot more of these individuals, which is 70%, so that the rentals is so that the building is sustainable. Because yeah, the building it can't be sustainable if you don't have enough people paying rental. Okay. Is that clear? Are there any questions on this particular slide?
Very clear, Chair. Very clear.
Thank you, Freddie. Thank you, Tabile. Yeah. So maybe I must also speak about the consequences, right? So if you don't adhere to this, the SHRA will send you a directive and say, Mr. Poe SHI, Nolo ODA, we have done an audit and we found that you have not met the SHRA requirements in your distribution. Here is a notice for you to fix, and they'll give you a certain amount of time to fix it. And they do check, right? So there are checks and balances in the system. On a quarterly basis, you are reporting on some frequency as well. The SHRA comes and does audits as well. So just be aware that you can't guess triple the system, but there is an understanding that in some areas, and it happens a lot outside of metros, that you might not be able to adhere to this to the T. So in smaller non-metros or smaller towns, you find there's a bigger market between 1.8 or 6.7, or even just above. But when that does happen, you go to the SHRA and say, here's my demand studies. It proves that there's a higher proportion of people in this income, and I don't have a lot of people, that are in that particular income group that would want social housing. So there's, but you still have to apply and look for permission to do that. Oh, and yeah, I think the next few slides, I'll just go through them by a minute. I think Mpo covered them to quite a good extent. But really, we speak about the principle of social housing, urban restructuring, good managed properties, and such. And I just want to move to the next slide. There we go. And some of the principles, it's about sustainable, viable projects. That was that slide with the different income bands. That really speaks to that, because if you don't adhere to those income bands, your project will not be sustainable, it not be viable. You don't want to have too many people of low income, because then they pay lower rentals as well, right? So I think those are some of the practical principles in the program. But there's a certain level of accountability that is required of delivery agents, right? You are getting a government grant, you are using public funds, and you are required by both, I guess, sort of law and as well as the social housing sector to operate, in transparency and with a certain level of, I guess, ethicalness governed by the laws of the land, because primarily you are doing this with government funding. So I think those are some of the typical high-level principles that we find in the program, or that you have to adhere to. And I guess just the three last slides, but this will spend a lot more time on tomorrow. We speak about an implementation framework. We're going to spend time just maybe after, I guess afterwards, on spatial instruments, the restructuring zones. We're going to spend a bit more time on the funding framework. That's the capital, the CCG. We spent quite a bit of time on the legislation. I think we've got about 2 slides on the Act and its regulation, but I think we've covered that. But also, John spoke earlier about institutional arrangements. So I think here was just to introduce some of those, but a lot more details of it will come through tomorrow about the role of SHIs, the role of the different spheres of government, and the SHRA and the NHFC. So I think some of these slides will be unpacked in a lot more detail tomorrow, but just to introduce that there is an implementation framework, so i.e. a guide. There's a step 1, step 2, step 3. This is who you speak to. This is who you go to for funding, and we'll unpack those in a lot more details. I won't spend, I think, maybe any more time on the Act. I think we've covered that to an extent. But I think what is important is just recognizing and that at a government level, national is key. We spoke a lot about the different legislation, the regulatory legislation. National government has a role to capacity building, and they also monitor the SHRA. So the SHRA reports to the national government, specifically the Department of Human Settlements. Provinces play a role in the sector, and as do municipalities, right? So municipalities, most important for today is they identify restructuring zones where social housing can be. They must provide access to land and building and services so that social housing can be built on. And maybe also importantly is when you do build social housing is you do require support from the municipality to say, yes, we recognize you and your entity, and we support you building social housing in our municipality. And equally as well, the province also need to support your project as well, but we'll get into those details. Cool. I think I've pushed. I think maybe if we can go for a bit of a comfort break, but also I guess at the same time I can ask if there are any questions from the legislation framework. Does it make sense? Is there anything that maybe we need to speak to? Okay, I'm just looking at the question. All right, we've got a question from Preeti, and maybe I'll cover that before we go. Is what factors determine the rent code? Let me go back to rent code. So rent code is here again, and the question is what influences this? There's 2 levels, Preeti and colleagues, right? So the first one is at a social housing regulation level, there actually is a clause that says the rent code must be 33, I think it says 33.3%. So it's actually fine, it's historical, but it's also based on the history of affordability, where it's common cause in South Africa that on average, for you to afford, I guess, a home loan, a car loan, we use the 33.3%. I think it's more historical. But what in social housing we've gone and then done is that while one must earn, because we have different people in different income groups, we find that they pay, I guess, different taxes, or different expenses. So then in the Social Housing Act, it went a step further to then say, let's not use, or in the operational implementation, the SHRA said we will not have, or we will not use 33.3 across all income bands, but we will split it according to how much one earns. And typically, I guess it's an inverse, right? So if you are earning far more, the rent code is slightly higher. But if you are earning a bit less, it can reduce. But in the operational details, you can maneuver it. But it's based on history of knowing affordability and typically, I guess, historical data on somebody that earns 1,080 can afford a place of 500. If we increase, if the rent code is different, he might not be able to afford. So It's not a perfect science, but I think it's a science based on historical performance, both in social housing as well as in other markets in South Africa as well. Cool. Thank you. All right. Colleagues, it is on my clock. If there's no questions, and they can keep coming maybe on the chat. It's 11:23. Maybe let us take a comfort break and be back at 11:35. 11:35. If that is fine with everybody. Yeah. Go for it, Thomas. Oh.
No, I said I pressed the hand.
Oh,
Yeah,
all right. No, Hendrix. Okay, cool. All right. Let's do a comfort break and be back in 11:35 and we can pick it up. That's about 10 minutes. Are we back? Ribuile, are we here?
Yes, I am, sir.
Thank you, Lomkhang. Thank you, Nikki. Maybe while we're doing, I'm curious to find out, and we can use the chat, from a province perspective. I know we've got KZN. Do we have anybody from Northern Cape? Anybody from Northwest? Oh no, we have Northwest, eh? I think the one comment earlier. I'm just going back quickly. Okay.
I'm also from Northwest.
Northwest, Musa. All right. Where in Northwest, Musa?
Umukhwasi.
Khwasi. All right. Okay. Are you gonna do some social housing there? Musa?
Yeah, so I've got a piece of land there, and I want to do social housing on it. But so I'm starting.
All right.
So I don't know the process. That's why I'm here.
No, 100%. No, we are here to give guidance.
Yeah.
And tell you where you can or you can't, how
Yeah.
to access funding.
Yeah.
And I think, colleagues as well, I think, obviously the agenda is structured, but it's quite important that, that's why I think we are happy to take interjections as we go through. And we are also sort of at the end, and I've sort of projected the program, we're also just allowing a good access time, for Q&As, so we are happy to take, I think the Shraz here, Nasho or myself are here. We've sort of been working in these streets for a while. And it might be as simple a question as, can I do social housing in Mokwase, or where do I go if I want money, to build this thing? Does the Shrai help me? Does government help me? No matter how simple or complicated the question is, we are really here to share our experiences. I've worked for a social housing institution for a number of years. And I saw colleagues as well, other colleagues. I think I saw Ekurhuleni Housing Company, if I'm not mistaken. I think I saw colleagues from municipal entities and SHIs. They can definitely sort of share their experiences or respond to particular questions that you might have. So please don't hesitate to call. So we've got Northwest, we've got KZN. Anybody from Mpumalanga?
Benton, Mpumalanga,
Great.
Leidenberg.
Leidenberg, nice.
Yes. It's a
Yes,
mining town in the Nhlanzeni municipality and Tabachel municipality.
I see it. No, I see Leidenberg. Very cold in Leidenberg, if I'm not mistaken. Or at least when I went, it was cold. Okay, great. Welcome. Sorry, somebody else was, anybody else from
Yes.
Mpumalanga?
Yes, Ngiki, I'm based in Nelspruit.
Nelspruit.
Yes.
And what work do you do in Nelspruit? Like, are you self-employed or are you working in the housing space? Ngi?
I am self-employed. I'm still exploring.
Good.
Yeah.
We definitely have a shortage of social housing projects in Mpumalanga.
Yes.
Broadly. So I think I would definitely encourage you to explore and give this good consideration. There's been some attempts, I think, in the Nelspruit area. Definitely, I haven't seen anything towards Leidenberg and that side. Okay, good. So we've got Mpumalanga. What town am I missing? KZN. I think Dezo's here. Dezo, you are operating in them Sundusi, or is it the Balito area? Just remind me.
We are actually in the northern KZN region in Richards Bay, area called Aquadene.
Okay. Richards Bay. And are you in construction yet, or you are still going through project applications?
We're not in construction yet. We've just been approved for funding by the SHRA. So we're going to be getting into the stage 3 and 4 detailed designs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
If all goes well, we're looking at breaking ground somewhere around March, April next year.
Right. No, wonderful. Wonderful. So it's possible, eh? The people in the call must not lose faith.
It is possible. Not an easy journey, but it is possible.
Good. No, hundreds. No,
that is very encouraging, my sister from Richards Bay, because I'm starting now. I could learn a few things from you.
Definitely. We're very much willing to share if we can help or if we can assist.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, David. I guess it's in I guess in the sharing and and I've had I guess some very limited sight of Dezo's and sort of process, and I think the company has been at this for a while. And as they say, it hasn't been easy. So the intention of these things and the cross sharing is, if it took me 3 years, it must take you, Lemohang, 1.5 years,
Yep.
Through those sharings. And when did Dezo start? When was the stage 1 concept? Pre-COVID or after COVID? Maybe let me ask it that way.
Okay, we got awarded the tender by Umhlatuza in March 2020. So we started right away packaging the project. Our first submission to SHRA was in 2021. So we've been at it since 2021 until now.
All right, great.
Incorporation of the entity was in 2017. Yes.
Right. Wonderful. No, man, that's actually it's a really great story to hear. And I guess in the next few slides as well, we'll speak to and then maybe we'll maybe ask the question intentionally to you, whether and probably has the SHRA been sort of supportive? Has there been instruments or grants that you were able to access to help you on this journey, or it's one of those where you must see to finish?
Are you wanting the answer now?
Let's go for it now. I'm sure the people will be curious.
We've been a very enthusiastic group of people. So every time when we approach the SHRA about the grants, it would be when we have passed the stage that makes us qualify for the grant. So we haven't accessed any grants as yet,
Okay.
but we have made inquiries on a few. But we would find that you've gone past that stage already, so
Yes.
we can't then fund you in retrospect.
Perfect. No, that makes sense. And maybe I'll expand on it as well, and it'll come up in maybe the next few slides. So, colleagues, what I think sort of the colleagues from DIS were saying is that there are certain grants that you're able to access from the SHRA to help you on your journey as you are packaging projects. But interestingly as well, there's also additional grants as well that are available once you have built and you are getting to the stage where you need to, I don't know, buy computers, hire leasing staff and marketing staff. There's also additional grants. Tabby, I guess, yeah, through, you've got the links into the SHRA. Just make use of those, because I guess as a sort of a startup in social housing, I guess the grants and the instruments are available, for your usage and for your growth. But well, we've got a slide on it for everybody's understanding as well. Then we'll speak to it. But I'm sure John as well will want to spend a bit more time on it. Cool.
Okay.
Hundreds. All right, I've got the agenda on the screen just to, I guess, check ourselves against what we want to cover for today. So I guess we've set the scene. We spent quite a bit of time in between myself and Paul. We spoke about the policy and the legislation. We've, I guess, did a bit of a comfort break. I'm gonna maybe skip the video just so that I don't what's the word, sort of kill people's bandwidth. But what I'll do, just to appraise everybody, I don't know if colleagues have been on the SHRA's website or and I'll bring it up quickly here, sort of take a note of the different videos and content that is available as very quick explainer videos on the social housing program, right? So this particular training, we're doing introduction to social housing. The SHRA has a simple 7, 8, 10 minutes teaser on what social housing is, where it can happen. So I want to encourage you to, I guess, click through and look at some of that content. I think there was another, I guess, participant who asked about SHI accreditation. There's also sort of some videos on SHI accreditation, but as we said in the morning, there's a whole 2-day training program, probably before first, second week of December, but that I think John will assist me. That will be happening, that solely focus on SHI accreditation. So, and then the part of it is typically that, you come to introduction, you get a teaser or an understanding of what the program is about, what social housing is, the risks, the opportunities. And then you say, okay, sharp, this is a space that I want to play in, or you are just walking away. And if you want to play in it, or you say from an additional information and knowledge perspective, typically the next buildings block would be SHI accreditation, where we talk you through the steps and processes and requirements in order to be accredited to become an SHI. Then I think once you are accredited, what Tabile spoke about is project accreditation. You are accredited entity. Now you want to have your project approved, or you want to have your project submitted for accreditation. And that's the next building block, right? And that is I guess then on SHRA's website, you'll find the accreditation teaser. And John, if you're still on the call, do we have project accreditation in this financial year in the training schedule? Okay, cool. John will come back. Then yeah, but yeah, I think just please, there's a lot of resources. Yes. Yeah, I was asking if I was just speaking about the different programs or training that you have for this financial year, but asking, I haven't, and maybe I didn't look if there's project accreditation scheduled in this for this financial year.
Yeah, we just doing a few things internally on the project accreditation. I think so, but I think we're probably scheduling those from Jan, Feb, because I think we're quite late into the year. So that will be up on the website in terms of the dates and the venues. Because we're going to trying to it from being virtual to being a contact, given the nature of the topic itself. But on the
No, hundreds. Thanks, John. Your line is still a bit sketchy, but I'll just repeat what I could hear. John saying that they are, I guess, working through some internal process with the intention of bringing project accreditation as training for next year sometime. Terms and conditions apply. But I think, yeah, the year is almost over. So I think, yeah, like then nothing will happen. So yeah, just equally look out on the Shra's website and register if you want some of these trainings. Okay, so let me get rid of this screen and go back to our presentation. Okay, so yeah, what time is it? Yeah, okay, not bad. So we're gonna spend a bit of time on restructuring zones as or some of the different instruments in the social housing program, right? One of them being the restructuring zone. In the morning, we said, social housing cannot happen anywhere and everywhere. There are different programs for other areas, right? So we've got a breaking new ground, this old RDP that happens in townships in the periphery. But our program is an urban program. So how does then government ensure that it happens only in an urban area? They do that through restructuring zones. And restructuring zones would be very specifically drawn areas that a social housing project can happen. So if and I'm going to pick on Mokwase in the Northwest. If I'm from Mokwase and I own a piece of land in Mokwase, one of the first things is, okay, is this land in a restructuring zone? If yes, then proceed to the next stage. If no, I might, I guess, have access, or I might be able to buy a property and I want to maybe operate in the Northwest. Then the next question is, in the Northwest province, where are other restructuring zones, and can I find a building or a piece of land that I can acquire? So that would be some of the practical thinking around it. So then that will be restructuring zones. We'll speak about the capital investment grants, as well as other grants that are available from the Shra. We'll do a bit of a recap and some Q&A. Okay, right. Let me get to the right slide. Okay, actually, it'll be fine. Let me just. Okay, we've covered this. Covered that. Okay, great. We were here. So restructuring, social housing program instruments, right? So we refer to, I guess, the restructuring zones and other mechanisms as instrument. Think of it as a toolbox, right? So what do you have in the toolbox to use in the social housing program? Spanere, screwdriver, and such things. So think of it in that manner. The instruments are the different instruments that we use in the social housing programs, literally. Okay, so let me just add Freddie. Okay, so the first is a spatial instrument, and the program and policy provides for a spatial instrument, as we said, and the second is an institutional grant instrument as well, right? And the institutional grant or the capital grant is, I guess, the capital, the money, the grant that you have or that we use. But what's important to just maybe highlight on this, let me get my marker on this slide, is just this is a typical layout of a I guess a typical South African city, if I can call it that, where let me move this, where we've got a CBD, and then you've got a footprint that goes out to up there to the periphery, to the townships. I guess the town planners and urban planners will speak about a spine, a transit spine, that goes, I guess, that everybody gets onto. I think in Gauteng here we've got quite a few, but the one that gives me the most headache is N1 and M1 because of the traffic. But you also have smaller spines within, right? So this enables us to go from the CBD into our different townships. What you'll also then find is typically you'll find maybe new growth areas or growth nodes. I think in KZN we had sort of the Balitos, the Mklangas, which were new growth nodes and areas. You'll typically have informal settlements somewhere, but along the urban spine, then you'll have, I guess, sort of suburbia and others. But I think the principle of this is just to kind of show how a typical a typical layout would be, but also to then emphasize that from a social housing perspective, we want to be operating here in the historically advantaged footprint. We want to be operating in transport nodes or transport spines, because what that does is that even though you might not be very close to an urban area or in the urban area, we do want our social housing project to be easily accessible or close to transport node, so that people are spending less time getting to transport and they are accessing transport. So that's sort of a high level idea of this. We're going to focus on to change my slide. There we go. Cool. On restructuring zones, right? So what are restructuring zones? Very simply, a restructuring zone is one of the instruments in the social housing program that designates to say in this drawing or in this area, this is where social housing can happen, right? At a process level, there's a long process of designating a restructuring zone. But for the purposes of today, it's important to note the characteristics of a restructuring zone, right? It must be in an urban area. We've said that it must have good access to transport. The urban environment must be good. A restructuring zone does not necessarily have to only be, and I'll use Sentini, where in Johannesburg or other, sort of where there is, I guess, sort of good building or economic activities. But, from a spatial perspective, we want restructuring zone to also include areas that are decaying. Joburg CBD, Pretoria CBD is not too bad. Durban CBD has improved significantly, but there are little pockets. Because earlier on we spoke about the social housing program being a good tool and housing program to regenerate areas and counter urban decay, right? But yeah, I think, this just gives a sort of a high level summary. If I'm working with Masipala, I've got a sort of a node that we want to push certain investment in it. They can designate that as a restructuring zone so that as property developers, we are able to invest and put projects in. They are, give or take, could be wrong by one, about 73 to 75 restructuring zones, mostly in metros and secondary towns across I'm trying to think what, actually across by now a lot of provinces, actually. I must just double check. I'm trying to think which province we don't have. In Polokwane, we've got restructuring zones, primarily in Polokwane. I mixed them up. We've got restructuring zones in the Free State, in KZN, in Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape as well. So they're spread across the country. But this is where if you want to do a project and it's not in a restructuring zone, to be honest and direct, you know, it can't happen. The Shra will not approve a project that is outside a restructuring zone. I think that's the very short summary. Yeah, this is just another view of, you know, where restructuring zones are on a typical layout of a city, right? So in the old apartheid era, once again, you found the CBD, you found an area that was exclusively for white people. You found areas that were exclusively or predominantly for Indians. And it goes on and on. Black people, what you typically then find in coloreds is there is also some sort of barrier, right? So it could be a big highway. You know, if you look at the Senton, Alexandra, so that's the M1. It could be a river as well that would then sort of do a split between between, I guess, that segregated or did the spatial segregation. I think, yeah, from a spatial restructuring perspective, so this spatial instrument called the restructuring zone says, let us have an area that is designated a restructuring zone, where whether you are of poor, moderate income, whether you are black, white, Indian, colored, whether you earn how much you earn within the bounds, you are able to live. And that is, I guess, the intention of the program and the spatial restructuring. So just a visual representation of, I guess, what we are trying to undo from a space perspective is to say, okay, sharp, this is a typical, I guess, you know, spine or road or buffer zone of sort, where you have high density informal settlements, or even if it's formal settlements, but you can see the denseness, right? But whereas on the left-hand side, you know, it's green, there's swimming pools, there's big yards, and I think from a social housing perspective and a social housing program, what the intention is to say that we need to undo this. People must be more integrated. And then practically you find that people on the right side are paying rent, right? But they just can't pay enough rent to afford to live in this area on the left-hand side. So let us develop housing opportunities for the people on the right side to live here, so that they can access the amenities, they can access the good schools, they can access all the amenities that are associated with the left. I think that's really the I guess the objective of undoing spatial segregation in the country. Then equally, what you then find is a typical layout where this is, I guess, in the periphery or the townships, and you have these sort of dense new areas of development. I think in Johannesburg, I can think not as, yeah, you know, sort of in the south, we're finding a lot of new housing projects that are going further and further in the periphery, and we're building high density. And I think our program has been that we first build the houses, then the schools will come, then the amenities in the schools. And then, yeah, I think from a program perspective, once again, we're saying that this is not what the intention of the social housing program is. We also now want to have housing opportunities in urban areas where some of the amenities already exist. Because we know that it takes government a while and private sector will also then respond only after the fact, with, I guess, maybe bringing in private services, retail, etc. So I think this is just another visual view of I guess, some of the consequences of spatial segregation in the country. What are the guidelines for social housing and restructuring zones? We spoke at length about integrating economic, racial, and social people into one area. You know, we want to align these restructuring zones with what in municipalities they'll refer to as urban development zones. you know, how I guess a typical municipality will say, this is our plan for the next 3 years or the next year. This is where the municipality wants to grow. So I think typically for our municipal attendees, we spend quite a lot of time around explaining how your IDP, your integrated development plan, that's the municipal annual plan on where budget is spending or where they are going to spend their budget, how that aligns with their framework or their 5-year plan, 5-year framework, and how that aligns with restructuring zones, because the RZ is not an instrument that is used on its own. It is an instrument that links with other instruments that are used at a municipal local level. That's important. But it needs to be also, I think, from a consideration and a characteristics perspective, the area that is designated as an RZ, there must be adequate economic activity. Oh, sorry, am I reading the right slide? Yeah, okay. You know, there must be adequate economic activity, there must be social infrastructure. You know, you don't want a restructuring zone to be in an area where there aren't facilities anymore. But I think we've sort of, I guess, explained that to quite some good length. It can be an area of new development where a city says this is the direction that we want to go, you know, be it Sandton, Kempton Park, or I think in KZN I can think of sort of the Bridge City area, where we're seeing an improvement in investment in the Bridge City sort of area, and there's similar areas like that across the country, and those would be designated restructuring zone. I think, yeah, let me just maybe pause there. I just want to show you just some photos of different areas that are restructuring zones. I don't know if do we have anybody from the Western Cape in attendance today? No. Okay. But if you look at I think if you look at the map, what we have, what is highlighted in red is what is a restructuring zone, right? If you're familiar with Western Cape and Cape Town, you can kind of see both, right? So Rondebosch, those are, I guess, suburbia. Rondebosch, Cape Town CBD is here. Then if you look here, Pinelands is not, but Langa is a township. That's not a restructuring zone because it does not meet the typical requirements or the requirements of restructuring. If you go further sort of west, Milnerton, Suburbia, Parow, I guess the slightly controversial one would be sort of, I guess, a good part of Mitchell's Plain, but Khayelitsha is not in an RZ, as you know, and Mitchell's Plain is historically a colored area. But I think the point of this is to kind of show both the positive and the negative, to say that restructuring zones are primarily in urban areas, Brackenfell, Stellenbosch, Grays River, Somerset West, and Stellenbosch on the right. But yeah, so that's how a typical map looks like. I want to see, we should have another area as well. Next one. Okay, this is a high-level map of Pretoria CBD, and a similar concept as well, in that you know, what is highlighted in red are restructuring zones gazetted by municipalities. You know, Gezina is probably about 7 minutes from Pretoria CBD, so we want people to be moving there. Pretoria North has been a booming node that is between sort of the townships of Pretoria, like Mabopane, Garangua, and others. And sort of Pretoria North is a midpoint before you get to Pretoria CBD. So from Pretoria CBD to Pretoria North must be a 15 minutes drive outside of traffic, 15, 20 minutes drive, depending. But this is, I guess, just to emphasize some of the intentions of the program. I think we do acknowledge that there have been restructuring zones that don't necessarily meet all the requirements. Atteridgeville is a township area, but Lodium was also a historically Indian area where we also want to sort of do integration, and it's close enough to the CBD. So that's just to kind of give a high level idea of I guess the different areas, in the different cities that have restructuring zones and don't. Just on the far right is Mamelodi, also townships, and you are further going out in the periphery as well. And another restructuring zone. Quickly, what do we have? Yeah, then the last map of an RZ that we have is in the Durban area. So you can see once again in red, Durban CBD, Morningside area, Pinetown is quite urban. Chatsworth, give or take, I think that's historically a sort of an Indian colored area, but colleagues will correct me, Westville. But yeah, that's just to kind of highlight. But also if you go further north, Umhlanga and even going up to Richards Bay, we find that our CBDs and urban areas are restructuring zones. And that's the idea of a restructuring zone and the objective to say, let us have RZs in a restructuring zone. Any takers on where I can find the restructuring zone? How do we know, right? So how do I hear you, Karabelo and John, you saying I must do this thing in a restructuring zone, but how do I access information on where an RZ is? Who do I ask?
It's in the IDP.
IDP. Is it not in the IDP?
Okay, we've got IDP question mark.
Is it not on the Shra website?
That's a good place to go. Shra website. So, yeah, okay, Masbala. So who's the custodian of restructuring zones? So who's responsible for restructuring zones? And can I go knock on their doors? Is the Shra responsible or is Masbala responsible?
Masbala Development Planning Department.
Yeah,
Thumbs up.
municipality. Yes.
Yeah. So designation of, let me actually be correct. Ne? The identification of restructuring zone is the responsibility of Masbala, right? So Masbala would do it with human settlements. They would do it with their planning teams, but also obviously broadly, they would then look at, maybe the engineering services and say we on transport, if it's a different department, and say we want to designate this as a restructuring zone. Does it meet the requirement? Would there be bulk services, etc., etc.? But while local municipalities identify and they would sort of draw these lines to say this is where we want to end, and this would be done, I guess, with spatial planning. The responsibility of gazetting ultimately rests with national government, right? So I must, I guess, provide that clarity to say that Masbala identifies, they keep records, they draw the lines, but then they must go to national government to say, national, please gazette, Chatsworth as a restructuring zone. But I think the straight answer to the question is you can go on the Shra's website. Let me see if I can find it. You will find restructuring zones. And from a resource perspective, you can click on the resource center. And I'm looking for it quickly. There we go. Hope everybody can see here. Restructuring zone. So if you click on restructuring zone, you will find quite a number of gazettes, right? I spoke about restructuring zone needing to be gazetted. So you will find the different gazettes here. They are, it's a bit of a manual thing, but it's there, it's listed, okay? Some municipalities are quite good in their gazetting. They've got maps. So that's the one source of information. And I agree, the other source of information would be human settlements in your local municipality, as well as spatial planning. From an IDP level, it should be there. It should be identified in the IDP. But I think what we do find is, I think my observation is that it gets mentioned in the IDP, but you don't necessarily see the designation and to say, no, this is the where the RZ ends or not. What we do observe is in the IDP, they'll refer and say, this is where we are going. There's a restructuring zone in Durban CBD, and we're gonna, I don't know, invest however millions on infrastructure there. Nora's asking about, would you have for Eastern Cape met for RZ? Okay, cool. I'll bring it up. I'll show where at a high level where RZs are in the Eastern Cape. I'll do that. Cool. But yeah, I think thanks for those contributions. It's definitely right. Check the Shra, check your local Maspala. Interestingly, the HDA also have copies of restructuring zones. And the HDA, there's a few offices across the country as well. So depending on the office's competence, you could also find the information there. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna just do a small touch on PHSDA, right? There is I guess this instrument within the Human Settlements department called the PHSDA, meaning Priority Human Settlements Development Area. And without spending too much time, these PHSDAs are areas where Department of Human Settlements gazetted and said, we want to focus investment in these designated areas. And so across the country and across a few municipalities, the department identified areas and said, here we will call it maybe the BNG program or the informal settlements upgrade program. We will the FLISP and like all of those different national housing program will focus on particular designated areas, and that's what the PHSDA is. I think for the purpose of today, we just want to emphasize that a PHSDA area is not by default a restructuring zone, and is not by default you can't do a social housing. So social housing, because it's governed by the Social Housing Act and its regulation, for you to deliver social housing, it has to be in a restructuring zone. And I think it's sort of that black and white. There was a few years a directive that said, or an instruction that said, or that encouraged that PHSDA or that social housing should happen in PHSDA, but that was subsequently explained that that is not the case anymore. So if I guess anybody's familiar with this, I guess the notion of PHSDA, we just want to clarify and be direct to say that social housing cannot be in a PHSDA. You do find instances, and they're not a lot, it's about 50% odd, where a PHSDA and a restructuring zone are overlaying, they're on top of each other. And therefore, you can build social housing there, but it's not because of the PHSDA, it is because of the area is within a restructuring zone. Okay. And I think, yeah, that's maybe just what we want to emphasize, just so that if you come across this PHSDA area theme, you are clear that you can't do social housing in PHSDA areas. Incidentally, there are more PHSDA, or PHSDA cover more ground than restructuring zones, because you do find them in a lot of townships or just between townships and urban areas. Cool. Right. Yeah. So I think the last 3 slides. Colleagues, maybe let me ask, is there any questions on PHSDAs and restructuring zones? We've tried to cover where to find the information. What do you do if your area is not a PHSDA? Can you ask the minister? Maybe those with direct lines can call the minister, or do you, what are the options? Is the idea of the objective of a restructuring zones clear? Maybe a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Right, thank you. Noted. Okay. Right, cool. All right, so let's get to the nice things, the grants. What are they? How much? How do you access it? Do you need to slaughter a chicken, do a blood test nyana for you to get these grants? Is there nepotism, or do you just apply? We are living in the country that we live in. But yeah, fortunately, these things are clear. They're written in black and white. Let's start on the how much. Nolo wants to build a social housing project out in Northwest or anywhere else. How much will the SHRA give you to build this thing, right? Let's actually just have real talk. So the first number to know is that for every social housing unit, you will receive, and this is current, obviously it changes every 2 years or so, you will receive 426,308 as a grant. The name of this grant, we call it the Consolidated Capital Grant. It is consolidated because it is the sum of two separate grants. The first grant is what we call the institutional subsidy, and the other one is called the restructuring grant. But I'll be honest, colleagues, I think these are details that are not as material, but just be aware. When you go to the SHRA, you apply for the 426,000 as an entity, right? And it's just broken down into two separate grants, but those are, I guess, it's just how the money works from the department perspective. There are some practical requirements. I spoke about a primary target market earlier on. 30% of people that are within your project must be within the primary market, and 70% must be within the secondary market. Okay. And maybe just to explain the 10%, there's a bit of detail. So the SHRA does not give you this 426, sort of one time and say, okay, Mr. Powe, you are accredited, you're going to build, here's 426. They give you the money in a series of tranches. But what's important, from a 10%, we speak about a grant retained until final drawdown. So the SHRA will leave 10% of the grant until final drawdown, when your project is complete, when they have audited to say that you've got the right people that have occupied this thing. It's a retainer to just put checks and balances in place, right? So that's important. And this is, the Consolidated Capital Grant, and this is our second instrument in the social housing program. I guess, this next slide just explains this again, to say the Consolidated Capital Grant is broken down into the institutional subsidy as well as into the restructuring capital grant. But I think for the simplicity of today, I think in the other training programs that the SHRA does, they get into quite a lot more detail on the Consolidated Capital Grant and its breakdown, as well as the payment cycle, how the SHRA pays you, what milestones you must achieve in order to claim from the SHRA once you've achieved or once you've received the Consolidated Capital Grant. But I think this is covered in a lot more detailed extent. I think for the purposes of our training is to just acknowledge and say that this is the amount that you would receive per unit. Terms and conditions apply, and those terms and conditions are expanded on other programs or other training programs. Let's see. Okay, so we said earlier on, there are different entities that deliver social housing, right? We've got social housing institutions, we've got other delivery agents, which are private sector entities, and we've got municipal owned entity. What this slide just wants to demonstrate is how a typical, entity would go about in funding a project. So let's say in a scenario where your total development cost is 500,000, this is how much it would cost you per unit as an SHI. Né? So the SHRA would give you the CCG, and that is the value of it. Ne? But there's a shortfall, right? The 500 less the 426, there's a shortfall of 73,000. So depending on what stage you are at as a delivery agent or as an SHI, you would either go and knock on different debt funders and say, Mr. Bank, Mr. DFI, or Miss Bank, Miss DFI, I need a debt of about 70,000. So typically, depending on the time, it could be about just under 30% or even less of your project cost. So this is how the funding works in very simplistic terms. Just want to check something quickly. Yeah, so typically your grant covers you, depending on when you get the grant, it will cover you at least about, at this current rate, about 70% of your total cost, if not even 80%. Yeah. Now, this is the structure for an SHI. What about the different entities or other entities? So you might say, no, I've been operating in the sector or in the property space, and I want to deliver social housing as an ODA. The ODA being the other delivery agent, which is a private sector developer. I'm just trying to think of, and then this would be any private sector developer that can come to the SHRA and say, we don't want to be an SHI. We already have a running business. It's not an NPO. We want to deliver projects as an SHI. So how this requirement works is that same scenario. Your total unit cost is 500,000. And I think the one thing you should be aware of, and this was introduced last year, right? So whereas the CCG is 426, for ODAs, there is a requirement for them to contribute 20% equity, right? So they must say, no, SHRA, we've got 20% equity. Therefore, we only need a less amount of, not less amount, but we only need, you are required as an ODA to bring in 20% equity. The equity can be in the form of cash, it can be the form of land and building and some of the costs that you've incurred. But since last year, the SHRA issued a directive to say that if your equity is, they've said that we will reduce the CCG amount so that you are still contributing an equity of 20%. So let me make a different example. So what you find historically was an ODA would come to the SHRA and say, I want to do a project, but that same project cost them 426,000, right? Which is the same amount as the CCG. So therefore, they then don't have to contribute equity because the grant itself is enough. So now things have moved, the money is a bit tighter, and the SHRA is putting controls. They're saying, no, but ODA, the regulations require you to provide an equity. So now the SHRA, in rationing the funding that is available, they are then saying, okay, if your project is less than this, therefore we will reduce the consolidated capital grant. This was in the SHRA's directive. And I think it's something that they are starting to implement, probably from this year onwards, as applications from ODA comes. But this is, there was a bit of a loophole historically where ODAs, yes, they are required to put 20%, but if their development costs are so low and efficient, then they would still receive the full CCG and not have to pay equity. So that is being tightened. I saw one or two colleagues from, municipal-owned entities. So the same story. So our MOEs, we regard them as, SHIs, or they would be registered with the SHRA as an HAI, and the same process flow works, except on the most case, practically they're not able to get debt. That's the first thing. That's the first major difference. They're not, MOEs typically don't have an ability to get debt, and they rely on the municipality to give them, call it a quasi-equity. But also the other difference, unfortunately, in the environment that we are in, is you'll find that their development costs are slightly higher than what a typical SHI would be or a typical ODA would be, right? And this is, I guess, the consequence of supply chain processes, government processes, and procurement. And perhaps, sort of lack of efficiencies in some of the supply chain processes and limitations. But the principle is really the same, that essentially, they would also get the same CCG. Unfortunately, their total dev cost would be higher or could be higher. And then they would then ask their municipal, principal to say, hey, we are building, the Shara is only giving us 420. Our project cost is 700,000. Can we get a top up? 4, 5? Yeah, that math looks a bit odd, but can we get a top up? And then that's, I guess, maybe just to make this thing a bit more practical around how the funding mechanisms and processes are in place. Pilari, am I misconstruing the MOE processes? I think I saw a few
No,
colleagues.
You are right on point. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues Pilari is the development manager at Ekurhuleni Housing Company. And she has the difficult job of trying to knock on the Shra's door, but also not being able to go and look for debt funding, but to knock on the municipal shareholder, but also have long fights with contractors and developers on site during construction periods. So I'm sure she can share stories for days on the difficulties and that. But yeah, I think colleagues, I'm going to take a pause there because this is, I guess, sort of a very practical representation, and take any questions around some of these mechanics. Go ahead, Barthelefan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. I wanted to clarify something because last week I attended the Shra roadshow, and there the information that was shared was that for SHI, it's 70%. Okay, 70% grant and 30% debt. And then for the ODA, then it was said that it's 70% grant, 20% equity, like you're saying, and then the 10% debt. Is it like that? Because with your numbers, it doesn't add up. It doesn't do that because it gets 85% grant for the SHI. So I just want to know, is it 70% or it has changed?
No, hundreds. No, that's a very good question, and I'll be able to respond. I just want to check if there's can't you advise the minimum? All right, okay, cool. Minimum units. Okay, so let me start with the debt grant clarification. So I guess what I think between ourselves, the Shra and other facilitators, we will speak in general terms around the grant. So let me try it differently. The grant is a fixed amount, right? Especially if let me put it in an SHI constant instance. So the grant is fixed. The grant at the moment is 426. Ne? So if I am building in, I don't know, anywhere across the country, and my cost of building of one unit is 426,000, I am therefore getting technically 100% grant, and I don't have to then go and look for debt or equity as an SHI, right? So the 70-30 examples that we, I guess, like to speak to, and which is why I guess my personal preference is to use the numbers, is it's an indication based on historical building cost to say, and I'll make an example. 2 years ago, the grant was not 426,000, right? It was maybe even less. It was say 326, 25, 20, yeah, something like that. So maybe how you must, I guess, think about it is work out first, what is the grant I'm getting and what is my total development cost? That then informs your ratio of your grant to debt or grant to equity. So the constant is the grant, because as an SHI, the SHRA will not then say you will now get 380,000 as a grant. So this amount will stay fixed, but the amount of debt you go and look for will then be a function of your real total development cost. Let me pause there. And just, yeah, is that part clear so far?
Yes, that's clear. I don't know if maybe you're gonna cover this later in terms of where we can go and get the funding for the debt portion, because the DFI have approached so far. They said it's outside their mandate. So you'll help us with
Okay, cool.
institutions that we can approach for funding.
Yeah. And what area are you? And then I'll answer generally as well. Or what area is your project?
No, I haven't started yet. I'm still.
All right. Okay. No, sharp. No problem. No, I was wondering. Maybe I must
I'm
wonder
still
the
doing
inverse.
the groundwork. Yeah.
So which institutions have said it's outside their mandate so that we don't go and knock on their door? Maybe just help the attendees out.
Is the NEF.
Oh, okay. Sharp. All right. I'll answer that.
Okay. Thanks.
Right. So colleagues, maybe if I can get a thumbs up, because this is an important sort of I guess summary nyana. Definitely I do agree, and I know in a lot of our historical presentation and the SHRA's presentations, they speak about SHIs 70-30 and ODAs doing 20% equity, 10% debt, and the CCG. So all of that is fact, but I think because construction costs are always moving and the grant is always moving, my guidance would be do it the inverse. Say, what is my construction cost and what is the CCG that I'm getting? Then what is also fixed is that as an ODA, you must do 20%. Okay. Nikki, maybe I should take you if it's related. Go ahead, Nikki. Can you?
Mr. Carabello, I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
wanted to make sure that I heard the presentation, this part clearly.
Yeah.
In terms of SHI, if my development cost is 426,
Yeah.
the grant will remain 426. But if your ODA and if your development cost is 326, they will actually apportion it so that you're able to take out 20% equity.
You heard it right, yes. Yeah. And I'm just also making a note that I guess just a facilitator from of this thing, but what we'll do as part of the pack that we sent out through John is attach the specific directive, because it's a new directive from last year that when the grant went up, that had this sort of clarification of the 20% equity, okay, and the reduction of the CCG. So I'm literally not like I'm quoting the actual directive, and I'll see if I can bring it up as well, just so that you see it. But we'll add it in the pack of presentations and notes that we bring out. Before I take Takalani, there was a question on, I just want to see quickly. Oh, minimum number of units, right? So can I go to the SHRA with 20 units, 50 units, 100 units? The straight answer is from a regulation and a directive perspective, there is no minimum number of units. But it's the mathematics, the maths must maths, right? And think of it practically. So as part of your project packaging, assuming the land is in order, the finances are in order, from a process perspective, you must also then say, okay, these are my construction costs. And once I've done building the sink, this will be my operating cost because it's in one of the SHRA's documents that you submit. So what then influences the number of units you build or the minimum is the financial feasibility or viability of your project. So practical example, you've got two buildings. The building one has, let's use a small number, 50 units. Project one has 50 units and project two has 200 units. A typical income statement of a project is you've got revenue. Building one will have a revenue for 50 units. Building two, let's say it has revenue, and we'll use maybe also a small number of 200 units. What then happens is from an operating cost perspective, so your security, your cleaning, maintenance to a small extent, head office expenses, let's call them overheads. You will find that your overheads on 50 units are the same as the overheads and operating costs on 200 units. So if you think of a typical building, I'll say a high rise or mid rise in Joburg CBD, you have one entrance, and you'll typically have two security guards, actually even four, right? So let's say you have two security guards, day shifty, and two at night. And the same scenario is replicable on the 200 units. It's a bigger building, one entrance, two day-night security, two day and two night securities. And you both have, one or 1.5 cleaners just cleaning the corridor. So what informs the number of units that you would submit is, does it become viable? Because on a smaller project, you've got less income to pay for the same or similar amount of expenses. So I think the sector's experience is you can get away. We've seen projects work at about 120 units. But most of the guys are now trying to come in at 120, 250. The bigger guys are doing 300, 600 because they've learned that the costs more or less are the same for the same amount of whether I do 100 units or 200 units. So let me go in and do more units because it becomes viable. And that would be the straight answer. John?
Thanks, Karabelo. I thought let me also add a portion there. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you're audible, sir.
What we also see is that there is some grant applicants who would rather take a very ambitious and a bold approach. Package a project 1,000+ units. And it can pose, while on one hand, it sort of fast tracks you from development point of view in building your portfolio to at least 2,000 units, which is where you reach your break-even point. It does, however, pose certain challenges and risks as well. And so a phased approach in terms of how you build up your portfolio would be a good approach generally in terms of where we say maybe start with a 100, 150 units or 200 units and build that up over a period rather than just on a one go, go and do 1,000+ development. So yeah, while on one hand, we're quite careful to say, smaller number of units might not necessarily work because at the end of the day, it's a question of viability. But it's also the same argument that must be made in terms of a bigger development where you bring in 1,000 units, and it does bring a lot, especially also. And I know a number of even old and established social housing institutions are quite careful in terms of packaging projects be bigger as 1,000 units and above.
Right. Thanks, John. And I agree with that. And even, just while we are on the grant sort of screen, another tip would be where we've seen, especially if I think before COVID, the subsidy was about 200 and something, or 226, if I'm not mistaken. And between post-COVID, we've had 2 increments of the quantum subsidy, right? So if I had a site and I could do 1,000 units, and I went to the SHRA and got 300 approved, I get my grant at the 200. And then once that project is almost complete, I apply again. I could have then, instead of building at that old 200 grant, I would have then received the 300 grant. And then I go for my last tranche, and now the grant is 426. So my other guidance would be, if you can, what's the word? Like, you don't know what will happen in the future, in the very near future, the grant quantum could increase, which would benefit you from a subsidy perspective. But also at a practical level, you've built the muscles, the experience, your systems are in place in terms of rental and rental management. And I'll maybe just take a pause there. Let's see, Takalani.
Thank you. Impressive presentation. I wanted to find out in terms of the equity. Can't we not use the land as well as part of equity?
Yes, you can. The straight answer is yes. So the SHRA will ask for an independent valuation of the land, and they would consider it as part of your equity. Okay, we've covered minimum units. So I was just typing, and let me just hit end. So it was about, and we don't have a slide on where can you go for funding, but I've put some notes in the chat. So NHFC is one. Let me actually start. I guess there are 2 levels. The first level would be at a national level from a DFI. So National Housing Finance Corporation, NHFC, they have funded the majority of social housing projects. They are accessible via the website. There's contact details. If you are in Gauteng, the local DFI is Gauteng Partnership Fund, GPF, yeah, GPF. They fund social housing. It's a Gauteng province entity that funds human settlements. At a national level, I skipped the DBSA, the Development Bank Development Bank of South Africa. DBSA are now funding social housing, the Development Bank of South Africa. Okay, so you can knock on their doors. There's a new institution that came up recently in the last 3 years, also called the Infrastructure Fund. You can also knock on their door. They've got a national footprint. There is some terms and condition in that they don't do funding for, I guess, 15, 20 years like an NHFC would, but they do more sort of bridging. But it does work, and there's been a few projects that have been funded, but the project has to be gazetted. It's a bit of a some terms and conditions. I just want to maybe also add, so interestingly, and I haven't checked on them in 2 years, but the NEF have actually funded social housing in the past. There's about 2 projects that I'm aware of, but their requirement was that you must be an ODA. And I'm putting an asterisk to say that what I'm saying is about 2 years old. But 2 years back, and say 2022 backwards, the NEF did find 1 or 2 social housing institutions, but their requirement was that they can only do it if you're an ODA. Maybe things have changed, so that's my asterisk. Go ahead, Batalifan.
Oh, they explained that they're only funding commercial, not residential. I think that was the change.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, hey, but I think, and yeah, that's in I think the notes there are in the DFI space. See? You can go to the banks. We've seen banks fund social housing. It becomes difficult if it's your first project, let me be honest, if not impossible. But Nedbank are a great sort of funder in the space, but they do want some sort of track record. So I think for your first project, I would really encourage you to knock on the TFIs, NHFC, GPF in Gauteng. We haven't seen too many of the provincial DFIs, with the except of GPF, operating in the space, but do knock on them, eh? I think KZN, I can't remember, it's not the Itala Bank, but there's a provincial DFI in KZN, eh? And maybe I think as a sector, as people, we just need to knock on their doors a bit more. And there's, I think in the Eastern Cape, colleagues will help me. There's another sort of DFI there that we've had quite a lot of conversations, and they're keen to get involved. Kuha, that's it. The word is Kuha. Kuha Development Agency. Where they haven't funded a project, but they are looking at opportunities and engaging as well. But I think if you go to NHFC, you should be around. Cool. Are we okay just on the funding? Just want to check my notes if I didn't skip any question. KZN Growth Fund. Yes, that's it. Yeah. Have you knocked on their doors, Tabit? I've just, I've seen their comms to say we are hungry for business, but okay, cool. No, try them out, eh? And then I would encourage everybody as well. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes to check if I've missed any questions. Yeah, our website. Cool. Yeah, I was trying to think. Northwest Development Corporation, they don't have money. Don't go to them. They don't have money to even manage their own stuff. But yeah, hey, I think we need to knock the Lim Dev. They've got a decent balance sheet, and they need to be spending. So I think anybody considering projects there should knock on their doors as well. Cool. So, colleagues, I think, yeah, there's just one last slide. Fortunately, I guess we've gone through some of the, I guess, the questions as we proceed. John, just as we speak to grants, I guess I spend quite a lot of time on the consolidated capital grant itself. Do you think it would be sort of appropriate if I ask you maybe to speak to the institutional investment grants, or do you want to leave that for tomorrow to tell the guys to say, okay, come, we'll give you R1 million grant so that they do come tomorrow to the training?
Look, I guess I can do that now. We have less than 10 minutes, and it's just one slide, right? So yeah, I'm happy to do this one.
Please proceed, sir.
Sure. So the up and above the consolidated capital grant that we've just touched on, ladies and gents, colleagues, there is also this call it institutional investment grants, or summarized as support grants. So besides, of course, putting in monies towards the development of the asset, there's an appreciation in the sector that we also are a small or a young sector. Karabelo has spoken about even the SHRA. If you look at SHRA, it's only been in place for the last 14 years, which essentially says we're 18. So this, I think, are premised largely on that base. And in this pot of grants, in fact, there are about 5 support grants that are available, and each has a specific purpose and the intended grant recipient for. So I'll start with the first one. As you can see, the pre-accreditation grant. Some of you might have heard this, so pardon me if you have heard the story before, but for the sake of those who are not with us in the previous sessions where we covered this, so the pre-accreditation grant was really created to assist aspiring social housing institutions who needs to be accredited. Because one would appreciate that amongst other delivery partners, SHRA or social housing works hand in hand, works well when you have a social housing institution in that arrangement. So before, a social housing institution can be provided the capital grant to go and develop, they have to be accredited. And there's a whole due diligence process that takes place in terms of accrediting a social housing institution, which includes, among others, development of policies, processes, and procedures. It's essentially as establishing a whole new company from scratch, which then says you need to put in place systems and processes and policies that would guide the functioning of it. So there's this pre-accreditation grant that is available. In terms of the grant quantum that one can access here, we have up to 200,000 rands per applicant that can apply for this grant. The second one, it's one which we call project feasibility grant. And here really, it's a grant that was created purely to do feasibility work on potential social housing projects. So if you have a building and you want to repurpose this building for social housing, and there's a need for us for you to conduct certain feasibilities around that building, or it's a piece of land, you need to test the feasibility, both technical and financial viability of such piece of land. We're able to assist, and I say assist because what this grant, in terms of the grant quantum, allows us to do is to provide up to 750,000 rands on feasibilities. Those of you who are in the built environment space would know that to do thorough and detailed feasibilities cost far much more than just the 750. So it's really an assistance up and above the full required amount to do full feasibility. So it would pay for things such as your phase 1, phase 2 geotech. It would do things such as the structural integrity assessment if it is an existing building. It would do or pay for things such as traffic impact, EAI, just trying to think, site development planning and things like that, or a consolidation of all those things, so that the project that has been registered into our pipeline as a potential social housing project can then be prepared to the point of readiness, so that it can then be presented to the committee that considers projects for the capital grant funding, the CCG. So that's project feasibility grant, and here SHIs and private developers, which are ODAs, can apply for this. So bear in mind that with a pre-accreditation, it's only for SHI intents, but for this one, it's more open-ended for SHIs and ODAs. In fact, also municipalities and provinces also may apply for project feasibility grant. The third one is which we call the staff gear up grant, and this really comes from appreciation that once you have been approved for the CCG, you go and break ground, and here are your 100 units that are now ready for occupation. At the point of taking on those units from the developer starting to tenant, there's an appreciation that you do not have revenue revenue at this point. So what the SHRA and government has put in place here is to say, to help you with that, those first months, let's say 6-9 months of taking on these units, you do need operational staff to be in place. Here we're talking about people who will be doing your leasing staff, people who will be doing your credit control, rent collection, and all the entire value chain in terms of revenue collection. People will be doing your facilities manager, or housing supervisor, or building manager, or facilities people. So the staff gear up grant then is there to fund the salary bill of those operational staff members, and it's up to 500,000 that one can apply for under the staff gear up grant. The fourth one really takes or moves from a premise that Once the project has been tenanted, you are now in marriage with the SHRA and you are required to report on the affairs of the project or the organization or the SHI. So in an instance where we pick up that in your reporting, you are not meeting certain performance benchmarks. In fact, that about 5 or so, and I'm sure Karabel will touch on those tomorrow. But amongst other performance benchmarks that we track on as the SHRA is the revenue collection. Another is your operating costs. So we assess these things as you report. And when we see that your operating costs are high and therefore are rendering the project or the SHI to be at risk in terms of financial viability or sustainability, we're then able to get in with remediation or remedial action. And that's what the remedial action grant is there for, where we see that the performance failures, we are able to then go in and assist you with remediation through this grant. The general capacity building grant, which is the last one, really is there for many things that includes training, research work. Further than that, of course, we also would fund capacitating a social housing institution. Let's say you have been approved for a project, but in-house you don't have someone with the capabilities in terms of development management. We would go into this grant and approve just something in the north of $1 million, I think, in terms of the grant quantum, to appoint and provide you with that resource in terms of development, social facilitation, whatever it is that is capacity related would be funded through the general capacity building grant. I think that's a long and short of the 5 additional support grants that are administered through the SHRA outside the CCG. Thanks, Karabelo.
Thank you, John. And yeah, man, I think that's I guess a positive sort of note to end on. And I know sort of my part was, or our part was very legislative, theoretically, but I think, just in concluding this, and we'll take some hands, the point is there are a number of mechanisms and ways in which the SHRA will support you in your social housing journey, right? Be it via pre-feasibilities or accreditation if you want to be an SHI, or when you are up and running to say, okay, let's help you find or buy or pay for staff, and I mean STAFF stuff, as well as some, I guess, sort of, tools of the trade. So I think, yeah, that's just maybe, I think, my sort of contribution. Lemogang, you've got a question? Go ahead.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Okay. The very first one for 200,000. Do you have to be an ODI or an SHI to apply for it? Or can just anyone who was just starting can apply for the grant? Thank you.
Noted. Maybe I'm going to take a second and third question and we'll try and answer them one time. Batalifing?
I just wanted to confirm that the first 2 grants, the pre-accreditation and the feasibility, they are paid to the appointed consultant to assist.
Okay, gotcha.
And then only the staff and the staff gear up is paid to the SHI or the ODA.
Right, noted. We will respond. Was there a third hand or no? Okay. So John, I'll cover the quick one. Yeah, just from a clarity. So the only grant that the SHRA will pay directly to the NTT is the staff gear up grant. All other grants, the SHRA will appoint a set of professionals, a set of consultants, and through their supply chain processes, and those individuals or entities will support you So got project feasibility, unfortunately, you can't say, no, I've got a set of professionals, we've ran out of money. Can I apply for project feasibility and then the SHRA pays your consultants? So that unfortunately does not happen or is not allowed in the policy. But it's only the staff get up grant, and it's with the understanding that you might have to pay for I don't know, staff, salaries, marketing material, and it might be far more efficient for you to do it directly. There are some checks and balances in that you must say to the SHRA, this is what I'll spend the money on, this is the estimated budget, etc. John, I just want to see, the first question was, who qualifies for pre-accreditation grant? Is it available? Yeah, maybe, yeah. Is it available? I know you've got some terms and conditions, and maybe if you can speak to that around, have I tried, or can I just wake up and say, John, may I please have 200,000 pre-accreditation? I was in a social housing training today. I want to register my NPO.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good question. So outright, this grant was created for aspiring social housing institutions. So if you're an ODA, you would not qualify for this one. This is purely just to assist you as an aspiring SHI to go across the line in terms of achieving that accreditation, which I've spoken to in terms of what is it that the SHRA looks at to accredit a potential social housing institution. So like Karabelo has said, in terms of the process, we would work with a team of consultants or professionals who would then be allocated to your institution, or with your team, they work on that application. In fact, maybe let me not also neglect that to explain that the process with the pre-accreditation grant, we do not outright approve this grant to an applicant. But the applicant, as part of the first step, is that we want to see that you have taken liberty. And again, this is the skin in the game kind of an approach, where we say, go in and apply for this process without, first going straight to the grant. And what that helps us to do is two things: your commitment, which is that skin in the game assessment. But beyond that, when you have applied for accreditation and it comes out as a no or as a decline, there is always a report that an assessor who would have assessed your application would write up. And that assessor's report is quite key, so that when we are to say we are coming in with a pre-accreditation grant, we know exactly where we need to be punching on. They might have picked up that, for example, your MOI needs to be cleaned up, or your policy on property development needs to be firmed up. And so this is where then we were able to direct those funds. So until we have clarity on which are the areas of need where we need to kind of target these limited resources to, it becomes quite hard to just willy-nilly open this grant for anybody who knocks at the SHRA's door. I hope it makes clear. So your first step in applying for the project feasibility, the pre-accredited grants, that you must have applied for the accreditation on your own, submitted the documents to our colleagues in the SHI accreditation unit, and they run the process, and that process will then spit out this assessor's report. And that's one of the documents that we need you to provide or to submit when you apply for the pre-accreditation grant. I hope that is clear.
Thank you. Oh, we got a thumbs up.
Yeah, it's Murara.
All right. Okay, cool. And colleagues, I think, that is, I guess, the sort of the last slides. I'm mindful of time. The last two slides we won't really speak to, because that is sort of a summary of what we've covered this morning. I guess what the decent housing, what the social housing income band are or is, legislation. We've covered spatial restructuring, capital grants, and institutional grants. which John has spoken to. I think this as well is also a nice sort of summary of the social housing program. We spoke about a rental program, the target market, primary and secondary. We spoke about the different delivery agents, municipal owned entities, ODAs, and SHIs. We spent quite a bit of time on restructuring zones, and just also emphasizing, that question around can I do 20 units or 100 units or 300? Social housing must be in a scale and build form that is medium to high density. And the Shara does check this as well. So I think I just, sort of want to emphasize that before we close. And my last one, if colleagues just allow me, I was asked, or the question was, where are the restructuring zones in the Eastern Cape? So let me zoom out. Fine, this is a bit of Eastern Cape. So we've got in Gqeberha and in sort of north of East London. I'll just maybe do a quick zoom in Gqeberha here. For colleagues from that side, let me zoom in some more. Sort of, you can see the Summerstrand, please develop projects there. They've got a nice sea view. The Wama area, we've got some projects from an SHI, I think it's Imizi. And you can kind of see, I guess, if you're familiar with the area, more or less where these RZs are. Let me zoom in a bit more. You can see the suburb names. Back up, there's one on the end side there. As you go slightly north, these are more restructuring zones. Utenake, there's also a recent project by an SHI in the same area as well. So we'll see how that performs. And more there, but this is sort of farm area, as you can see. And then let me zoom out and quickly move to East London. Those are from that side. Bisho has a restructuring zone. You would do your own detailed assessment and Gomasingata, that area. But I think in this more urban or the areas that us know slightly more as outsiders would be East London, right? There's a few RZs as well in the East London area. So I just thought before I forget, let me just bring those maps. But I think, this is available on not on the link, but I think the actual names of the RZs and where they're located, you'll be able to find on the Shra's website as conveyed today. Cool. Colleagues, that is it from us as the Shra and facilitators for the day. Okay, I missed Mtata. If there are any questions, I'm happy to stick around for 5 more minutes. But John, through you, may I close and thank you colleagues and attendees for their attendance. And just to reconfirm, tomorrow starting time is same time as 9 o'clock.
Yep, let's start at 9. And hopefully we are done by lunchtime.
All right, shame. And tomorrow's program will, there's no legislation. It'll be quite practical and real stuff. So we'll be able to also move quickly. But colleagues, man, thank you. I know these virtual trainings, they're not always easy, but thank you for your participation, input, questions. Let's do it again. Please dream of social housing tonight. And think of questions to ask us or how we can help. Like, we're really here to help. There's experienced people in the room over and above us. So bring those questions. Thank you, Releboga Siyabonga.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you,
See you
guys.
bright and early tomorrow.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the rest of
Thank
your
you very
afternoon.
much.
Bye all.
Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Empowered.
Oh, great, man. I'm happy.